I need you to understand something before we start. This character should be illegal. Quiet kid, calm face, zero ego. But the moment you push him, it's over. Like actually over. Like pack your things and go home over. All right, let's get into this story.
Welcome, Legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
It started, as most things do in the world of quirks, when he was 4 years old. Musutafu, Japan. A playground. The kind of unremarkable concrete slab surrounded by chain link fence that every kid in the country has scraped a knee on at least once, right? There were about a dozen children running around that afternoon, doing what kids do. Screaming, shoving, competing. All of them freshly discovering their quirks, drunk on the novelty of having superpowers in their tiny little bodies. And at the center of it all, as always, was Katsuki Bakugo. Now, you need to understand something about Bakugo at 4 years old. He was already loud, already aggressive, already absolutely certain that he was the greatest thing to ever walk the earth. His quirk had come in early, nitroglycerin sweat that he could detonate at will from his palms. Tiny explosions, sure, kid-sized, but in a playground full of children whose quirks amounted to stretchy earlobes and the ability to attract small objects, Bakugo was a god among insects, and he knew it. Everyone told him so. His teachers, his parents, the other kids. Even Izuku's own mother once made the mistake of saying, "Oh, that Bakugo boy is so talented, isn't he?" And Bakugo absorbed every compliment like fuel. That particular day, there was a boy, some kid whose name history never bothered to record, being shoved around near the swing set. Bakugo and his two little followers had cornered him. The kid was crying, snot running down his face, the whole picture. Izuku Midoriya was sitting on a bench nearby. He was reading. At 4 years old, Izuku Midoriya was already reading books meant for kids twice his age. Not because he was showing off. Not because someone made him. He just preferred it. Quiet. Pages. The weight of a book in his hands. Even at 4, Izuku was the kind of kid who would rather sit in a corner and watch the world than throw himself into the noise of it. His mother, Inko, called it his thoughtful nature. The other kids called it weird. Bakugo called it weakness. But here's the thing. Izuku was watching. He always was. He watched Bakugo shove the kid. Watched the two followers laugh on cue. Watched the pattern. Shove, laugh, taunt, shove again. And something in Izuku's chest shifted. Not anger exactly, something quieter, something that felt like a pilot light clicking on behind his ribs. He put his book down. "Hey," that was all he said. One word. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. Bakugo turned around, looked at the green-haired boy standing 5 feet away with his hands at his sides and that flat, unreadable expression on his round little face. And Bakugo grinned. Because this was Izuku, quiet Izuku, the kid who never fought back, the easiest target on the playground. "What do you want, Midoriya?" Bakugo said, palms already crackling. Little pops and sparks dancing across his skin. The two followers stepped back instinctively. They'd seen what those mini explosions could do to an arm. "You want to take his place? Fine by me." He lunged, palm out, explosion aimed right at Izuku's face. And this is where the story changes. The blast left Bakugo's hand. A bright orange flare, the kind that would leave a nasty burn on any normal kid. It traveled the 5 feet between them in a blink, and it died. Not deflected, not dodged, not blocked. It simply ceased to exist. About 6 inches from Izuku's face, the explosion hit something invisible. A wall of heat so intense, so fundamentally extreme that the nitroglycerin combustion, a literal explosion, couldn't survive in its proximity. The fire ate the fire. The blast dissolved into a faint wisp of smoke that curled upward and vanished. Bakugo's hand was still outstretched. His fingers were still spread. The playground had gone completely silent, and Izuku Midoriya just stood there, looking at him, not smiling, not frowning, not flinching, just looking. Those big green eyes, calm as a lake at dawn, staring directly into Bakugo's soul with the patient, bottomless focus of someone who had already figured out everything they needed to know. The air between them shimmered. Like asphalt on a hot summer day, except the shimmer was coming from Izuku. From his skin, from the space around his body, where the temperature had quietly risen to something that made the playground fence nearby start to tick and groan as the metal expanded, Bakugo felt it. The heat. Not burning him. Not yet. But pressing against his skin like a warning, like standing too close to an open oven. His body, on pure animal instinct, took a step back. He'd never taken a step back from anyone in his life. "Your quirk," Izuku said quietly. Matter of fact, like he was reading from one of his books. "It's combustion-based. You sweat nitroglycerin and ignite it. That means your explosions have a temperature ceiling. Somewhere around maybe 1,500 degrees Celsius at your age?" Bakugo blinked. "What? Mine doesn't have a ceiling." Silence. The kid who'd been getting bullied scrambled away while Bakugo was frozen. Smart move. The two followers were already at the edge of the playground, pale-faced. They couldn't articulate what they were feeling because they were 4 and didn't have the vocabulary for it. But if they did, the word would have been dread. Because Izuku Midoriya, at 4 years old, standing in the afternoon sun of a Musutafu playground, was glowing. Not dramatically. Not like an anime transformation sequence. It was subtle. A faint golden luminescence along his skin, concentrated around his hands and face. The warmth radiating from him made the air dance. And his eyes, those green eyes, had tiny flecks of gold in them that hadn't been there a moment ago. Bakugo stared at him. And for the first time in Katsuki Bakugo's short, loud, explosive life, he had absolutely nothing to say. Izuku held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he turned around, walked back to the bench, sat down, and picked up his book. He didn't say another word for the rest of the afternoon. But the playground remembered. And so did Bakugo. Now, here's where a different story would have the hero rise up, start flexing on everyone, become the king of the schoolyard. But that's not who Izuku Midoriya was. What happened instead was quieter. And honestly, kind of sad, because the same night as the playground incident, Izuku was sitting at the dinner table with his mother, eating curry, when he noticed the chopsticks in his hands starting to char. He put them down, stared at his fingers. The wood was blackened where he'd been holding them, not burned through, but singed, damaged, just from his grip. He looked at his mother across the table, Inko Midoriya, the kindest woman in Japan, smiling at him with those big eyes that were so much like his own. And 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya thought, what if I hurt her? Not might. What if? Because in his analytical little mind, the question wasn't theoretical. His body radiated heat. Constantly. The ambient temperature around him was already elevated beyond normal, and his quirk hadn't even fully developed yet. How hot would he get at 10? At 15? At 20? How close could anyone stand to him without getting burned? He didn't cry. Even at 4, Izuku wasn't much of a crier. He processed things internally, turning them over and over in his mind like stones in a tumbler until they came out smooth and understood. But that night, after his mother tucked him in and kissed his forehead, wincing slightly at the warmth of his skin, though she tried to hide it, Izuku made a decision. He would learn control, not for himself, for everyone around him, and he would do it alone. The next 10 years of Izuku Midoriya's life could be described in one word: discipline. While other kids joined clubs, made friends, chased each other through the streets of Musutafu, Izuku trained. Alone, every morning before school he ran. Not on a treadmill, in a gym. Outside, under the open sky where the sun hit his skin and he could feel his reserves filling like water into a well. He ran until his legs burned from exertion, not from heat. Push-ups, pull-ups, core work. Flexibility drills he pulled from martial arts tutorials online. He read everything he could about thermodynamics, about solar physics, about the electromagnetic spectrum. He understood, even as a child, that his quirk wasn't just fire. It was solar energy. His body was a living reactor, absorbing radiation from the sun, converting it into thermal energy that he could store, concentrate, and release at will. That meant his power had rules, and rules could be mastered. By age 8, he could modulate his body temperature precisely enough to hold his mother's hand without hurting her. It took 4 years. 4 years of daily practice, of meditative focus, of controlling every cell in his body to dampen the ambient heat his quirk naturally produced. Inko cried when he took her hand that day. He didn't cry, but he held on for a very long time. By age 10, he could generate focused beams of thermal energy from his fingertips, not fire, pure heat. Invisible, precise, capable of cutting through steel at close range. He practiced on scrap metal in a junkyard at the edge of town, always early in the morning when no one was around. He learned his effective ranges, his energy consumption rates, his recovery periods. He kept notebooks full of data, numbers, calculations, observations. By age 12, he could create visible flame constructs, concentrated solar plasma shaped by his will, spheres, blades, shields. The temperature of these constructs exceeded anything Endeavor had ever demonstrated publicly, and Izuku was a middle schooler. He told no one. He showed no one. His teachers at Aldera Junior High knew he had a fire-type quirk. That was on his registration, but they had no idea of its scope. To them, he was just the quiet kid in the back who got perfect grades and never raised his hand. By age 14, Izuku Midoriya could bench press his own body weight, run a 5-minute mile, analyze a quirk's mechanics from a 30-second observation, suppress his ambient heat output to normal human levels through pure concentration, and, if he wanted to, turn a city block into glass. He did not want to, but he could. And the distinction between those two things is the entire point of this story. Let's talk about Aldera Junior High for a second, because it's important. Izuku went to the same school as Bakugo. Same classroom, in fact. And if you're expecting some dramatic rivalry, heated confrontations in the hallway, explosive showdowns on the rooftop, I'm going to disappoint you. Bakugo avoided him. Not obviously. Bakugo was still Bakugo. Loud, aggressive, top of every physical test, the undisputed king of the school. He still bullied other kids, still screamed at anyone who looked at him wrong. Still declared daily that he was going to be the #1 hero and everyone else should just get out of his way. But he gave Izuku Midoriya a wide berth. It was subtle. He'd pick a seat on the opposite side of the classroom. He'd choose different hallways. If a group project threatened to pair them together, Bakugo would loudly demand a different partner, citing some vague complaint that had nothing to do with the real reason. The real reason was that Bakugo remembered that day on the playground. The explosion that dissolved, the eyes that didn't flinch, the heat that pressed against his skin like the breath of something enormous, Bakugo remembered, and some deep, primal part of him, the part that all the praise and bluster couldn't quite silence, knew that Izuku Midoriya was not someone he could dominate, not with words, not with fists, not with explosions. And for Bakugo, who had built his entire identity on the certainty of his superiority, that knowledge was poison. So he avoided it, pushed it down, focused on everyone else. Izuku noticed, of course. He noticed everything, but he didn't engage, didn't provoke, didn't gloat. He just went to class, took his notes, ate his lunch alone on the roof, and went home to train. That was his life. Simple, quiet, controlled, until the day he decided to apply to UA. Now, the day Izuku turned in his UA application at Aldera, the teacher made the mistake of reading it out loud. "Oh, Midoriya, you're applying to UA too?" The whole class turned to look at the quiet kid in the back corner. Bakugo's head snapped around so fast it's a miracle he didn't crack a vertebra. Izuku just nodded. Yes, that was it. No speech, no declaration, no dramatic fist pump, just a simple confirmation, spoken at normal volume, with the same inflection you'd use to confirm a lunch order. The class erupted. Laughter, mostly. Because to them, Izuku was nobody. The quiet weirdo with the unspecified fire quirk who never demonstrated anything impressive. A few students started in with the usual, "You think you can get into UA? That's where the real heroes go. Stick to general studies, Midoriya." Izuku didn't respond. He was already back to reading. But Bakugo? Bakugo was staring at the back of Izuku's head with an expression that was halfway between rage and something else. Something he'd never admit to. He didn't say a word either. The bell rang. Class ended. And Izuku Midoriya walked home under the afternoon sun, feeling the warmth sink into his skin. His reserves filling with every step. 10 months until the entrance exam. He had work to do. Those last 10 months before UA were Izuku's most intense training period. Not because he needed to get stronger. He was already monstrous by any reasonable standard. But because Izuku Midoriya was the kind of person who prepared for everything, he studied UA's entrance exam format. Practical combat against robotic villains, point-based system, timed. Urban environment, he adjusted his training accordingly. He practiced his precision, targeting specific points on metal structures to disable them efficiently. He worked on his mobility, incorporating parkour fundamentals to navigate urban terrain without relying on his quirk for movement. He refined his energy conservation, learning to accomplish maximum damage with minimum expenditure, and he ran the numbers. At noon, under direct sunlight, his power output exceeded anything the exam could reasonably throw at him. But what if it was cloudy? What if the arena had overhead coverage? What if there were civilians, other students in his line of fire? He had to be precise, he had to be efficient, he had to be able to end threats quickly without turning the entire testing ground into a crater, because that was the difference between Izuku Midoriya and every other powerhouse in the world. Endeavor had raw flame. Bakugo had raw explosions. They were hammers looking for nails. Izuku was a scalpel that happened to burn at the temperature of a star. His mother, Inko, worried. Of course she did. She'd watched her son grow up alone. Not lonely exactly, but alone. He didn't seem unhappy. He wasn't withdrawn in a damaged way. He was just self-contained, like a lantern with the shutters closed. All that light held inside, glimpsed only through the cracks. "Are you sure about this, Izuku?" she asked one evening, watching him do pull-ups from a bar he'd installed in his bedroom doorframe. UA is so competitive, and the hero course, it's dangerous. He dropped from the bar, looked at her, and for just a moment the shutters opened. "I want to help people, Mom." Simple, direct, warm. Not for glory, not because I want to be number one. When I think about someone out there in the dark, scared, alone, and cold, he paused, looked at his hands. The faintest golden glow pulsed beneath his skin, there and gone in a heartbeat. I want to be the warmth that finds them. Inko Midoriya, for the record, absolutely lost it. Full waterworks. She hugged him so tight he had to consciously suppress his ambient temperature to keep from burning her sweater. "You're going to be an incredible hero," she whispered into his shoulder. He hugged her back. I'm going to try. The morning of the UA entrance exam, the sun rose over Musutafu in a blaze of gold and orange, like the sky itself was rolling out a red carpet. Izuku noticed. Of course he did. He'd checked the weather forecast 6 times in the past week. Clear skies, direct sunlight from 11 a.m. onward. The exam was scheduled for noon. Perfect. He ate breakfast. A large one. Rice, eggs, fish, miso soup, an extra portion of vegetables. His body converted solar energy into his primary fuel, but the physical vessel still needed maintenance. He kissed his mother on the cheek, promised he'd text her when it was over, and walked out the front door into the morning light. The walk to UA took 45 minutes. He could have taken the train, but he preferred to walk. Partly because he hated the crush of commuter crowds, partly because every minute under the open sky was another minute of charging. By the time he reached UA's gates, his internal reserves were at maximum capacity and the sun was climbing toward its zenith. He felt full. Like a battery humming at 100%. Like a glass filled right to the brim, surface tension the only thing keeping it from overflowing. The gates of UA were massive, iconic. Every aspiring hero in Japan knew what they looked like, and the crowd gathered outside them was enormous. Hundreds of applicants from across the country, all buzzing with nervous energy, showing off, psyching themselves up. The noise hit Izuku like a physical force. Conversations, laughter, the crackling and popping of quirks being tested, someone's engine legs revving, someone else growing vines from their hair. Izuku pulled the hood of his jacket up, tucked his hands in his pockets, and navigated through the crowd like a fish through rapids. Smooth, silent, never touching anyone, never making eye contact. A few people noticed him. Not because he did anything noticeable, but because in a crowd of peacocks trying to outdisplay each other, the one person who wasn't performing stood out by contrast. A tall boy with dark blue hair and glasses, rigid posture, hand-chopped gestures, clearly from a wealthy family, watched Izuku pass and frowned, as if the quiet boy's lack of enthusiasm was somehow offensive. A girl with brown hair and round cheeks almost bumped into him near the entrance. "Oh, sorry, She stopped, blinked, felt the warmth. Not uncomfortable, just present, like standing near a fireplace on a winter day. She looked up at the green-haired boy, and for a moment, those calm green eyes with the faint gold flecks met hers. "You're fine," Izuku said. Quiet, a ghost of a nod. Then he was past her, moving through the doors, gone. Uraraka Ochako stood there for a second, hand pressed to her chest. Her cheeks were pink, and it wasn't from the cold. Was he warm? She murmured to herself. She shook it off and followed the crowd inside. The auditorium was chaos. Present Mike was on stage doing his thing, the DJ hero, all volume and energy, explaining the exam format with the enthusiasm of a man who'd had 17 cups of coffee. "Welcome, listeners. Are you ready?" Silence. What a refined response. Present Mike didn't miss a beat. The man was immune to awkwardness. "Let me break it down for you. The practical exam takes place across 7 battle centers. You'll be assigned to a center at random. Your targets are Fogg's villains, robots, baby. 3 types. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, 3-pointers. Take them down, rack up points. Simple, right? The screen behind him displayed the robot designs. Izuku studied them from his seat in the back row, his analytical mind already cataloging structural weaknesses, joint vulnerabilities, probable armor composition. There's also a 0-pointer. Present Mike continued, gesturing at the enormous silhouette on screen. This one's worth 0 points and is basically an obstacle. My advice, avoid it. The tall boy with glasses stood up in the middle of the auditorium. Excuse me, may I ask a question? There appear to be 4 varieties of villains on the handout, but you've only described 3. Such a discrepancy is unbecoming of Japan's top hero academy. Furthermore, he turned and pointed directly at someone in the crowd. You there, the one who's been muttering, you're distracting everyone around you. A brief pause. People looked around. Izuku was not muttering. He was sitting in complete silence, arms crossed, eyes closed, running calculations in his head. The boy with glasses had pointed at someone else entirely. Some nervous kid 3 rows down, who was whispering to himself. But a few people's eyes drifted to Izuku anyway. The quiet one in the back, the one who somehow stood out without doing anything. Izuku didn't open his eyes, didn't react, didn't even seem to register the interruption. All right. Present Mike waved the glasses boy down. That 0-pointer is a gimmick worth 0 points. There's no reason to engage it, it's just there to shake things up. But Izuku, behind closed eyelids, filed that information away. 0 points. No reason to engage. Which meant it would be the largest, most destructive robot on the field, designed to cause panic and test composure. Interesting. Battle Center B. Noon. The sun was directly overhead. Not a cloud in the sky. The light poured down on the fake cityscape like liquid gold, warm and heavy and relentless. Izuku stood at the back of the starting group, hands in his pockets, hood still up. Around him, dozens of examinees bounced on their toes, cracked their knuckles, stretched their limbs. The tension was electric. The girl from earlier was near the front, rolling her shoulders. The glasses boy was doing some kind of warm-up sprint in place, engines in his calves, rumbling. A blonde boy with a laser belt was striking poses. A girl with long, dark hair had already created objects from her body, testing their weight and balance. Nobody paid attention to Izuku. He was just a guy standing in the back with his hands in his pockets. Then, start! Present Mike's voice exploded from speakers mounted on every building. What are you waiting for? There's no countdown in a real fight. Go, go, go. The crowd surged forward, a stampede of quirks and ambition. They poured into the fake city like water through a broken dam, spreading out, hunting for robots desperate to score. Izuku walked, not ran, walked. His hands came out of his pockets, his hood came down, and the sunlight hit him full in the face, and something shifted, like a switch being flipped, like an engine going from idle to engaged. His skin began to glow, faint, subtle, a warmth that was more felt than seen. The air around him started to shimmer, and the concrete under his shoes developed hairline cracks from the radiant heat of his footsteps. He turned left down a side street while everyone else charged straight ahead, and he went to work. The first robot came around a corner. A 1-pointer, bulky humanoid about 8 feet tall, green optical sensors, pneumatic fists. It locked onto Izuku immediately and charged, metal feet crunching on asphalt. Izuku raised his right hand, index finger extended. Casual. like he was pointing at something mildly interesting. A thin beam of golden light, no wider than a pencil, left his fingertip. It was silent. No explosion, no dramatic sound effect. Just a clean, precise line of concentrated solar energy that crossed the distance in an instant and struck the robot dead center in its chest panel. The beam punched through the front armor, through the internal circuitry, and out the back. The robot stopped mid-stride. Its green optical sensors flickered. Then it collapsed, a perfect circular hole bored through its core, the edges glowing white-hot, molten metal dripping like candle wax. Izuku lowered his finger and kept walking. 1 point. In the monitoring room, every UA teacher was watching the exam feeds from dozens of screens simultaneously. It was organized chaos, heroes pointing out impressive applicants, debating scores, making notes. Camera 12, said a calm, measured voice. Nezu, the principal of UA, a small, white-furred creature of ambiguous species, brilliant beyond measure, currently sipping tea from a cup that was comically too large for his paws. Focus on Battle Center B, the boy in the green hoodie. The technician adjusted the feed. The screen zoomed in on Izuku Midoriya, walking calmly down a city street, pointing at robots like he was choosing items from a menu. Beam. Dead. 1-pointer down. Beam. Dead. 2-pointer down. Beam. Dead. 3-pointer down. Each shot was identical, clean, a single finger, a single beam, a single kill. No wasted movement, no wasted energy. The robots didn't even get within 20 meters of him. Silence spread through the monitoring room. Is that? Midnight leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Is he melting them? From that distance? Focused thermal emission, Nezu said pleasantly, taking another sip of tea. Solar-based, if I'm not mistaken. The precision is remarkable. He's targeting their central processing units specifically. Maximum damage, minimum energy expenditure. He's walking, Present Mike said. Not shouting for once, his voice was almost reverent. The kid is literally walking through the exam. On screen, Izuku rounded another corner. 3 robots, a cluster, 2-pointers, turned to face him simultaneously. Their weapons charged. Pneumatic arms raised, Izuku pointed. 3 beams, 3 shots, 3 molten holes, all in under 2 seconds. He didn't break stride. 22 points, Nezu noted, watching the counter tick up, in 4 minutes, and he hasn't increased his pace once. In the back of the room, a man wrapped in bandages and a black jumpsuit, Shota Aizawa, the underground hero Eraserhead, was watching the screen with a single visible eye. His expression hadn't changed, but his coffee had stopped halfway to his mouth 3 minutes ago and hadn't moved since. What's his name? Aizawa asked. Midoriya Izuku, Nezu replied. Aldera Junior High. Quirk registered as fire type at age 4. That's all the file says. That's not fire, Aizawa said flatly. That's a solar cannon in a teenager's body. Isn't it wonderful? Nezu beamed. Back in Battle Center B, the other examinees were starting to notice. It was hard not to. See, when you're sprinting through a fake city, frantically punching and kicking and blasting robots for every point you can scrape together, and you keep arriving at intersections only to find the robots already destroyed, melted, specifically, with perfect holes through their centers, edges still glowing, you start to ask questions. What the hell happened here? A boy with red, spiky hair, Eijiro Kirishima, quirk, hardening, stared at a 2-pointer that had been cored like an apple. The metal around the hole was still dripping. Something burned right through this thing. Look at the cut pattern, said a girl with a spiky ponytail, Momo Yaoyorozu, already analyzing. It's thermal, extremely focused. This isn't an explosion or a flame attack. This is a directed energy beam. The temperature required to bore through this grade of armor this cleanly would be... She trailed off, doing the math. Her eyes widened. That's not possible. But it was. Across the battle center, Izuku continued his calm walk. He'd cleared 3 blocks already. 41 points. His face showed no strain, no excitement, no urgency. He was operating at maybe 2% of his capacity, treating the exam robots like target practice. He turned down another street and paused. A voice. High-pitched. Scared. He looked. Uraraka. The brown-haired girl from outside. She was in trouble. Not critically. She'd been doing well, using her, gravity nullification quirk to float robots and drop them. But she'd pushed too hard and hit her nausea limit. She was on her knees, hand over her mouth, surrounded by the wreckage of 3 robots she'd already taken out. But 2 more were closing in, and she was in no shape to fight. Izuku assessed the situation in about half a second. Distance, 40 meters. Angle, clear line of sight. Civilians in the way, none. He raised his hand. 2 fingers this time. 2 beams. 2 robots dropped simultaneously, holes bored through their central units. The metal hit the ground with a crash that made Uraraka flinch. She looked up, saw the green-haired boy standing at the end of the street, hands still raised at sunlight framing him from behind. "You okay?" he called out, not shouting, just loud enough to carry. "Aye." She wiped her mouth. "Yeah, thank you." He nodded, lowered his hand, kept walking. Uraraka stared after him. "Who is that guy?" She whispered. That question was about to be on everyone's lips. 8 minutes into the exam, the ground shook. Not a tremor, a full-on earthquake, the kind that made buildings sway and windows shatter and every single person in the battle center stagger. Something was coming. Something massive. The zero-pointer emerged from behind a row of buildings like a kaiju in a monster movie. It was enormous, easily the size of a 15-story building, a towering mechanical nightmare with treads the size of city buses and arms that could crush entire blocks. Its shadow fell over the battle center like an eclipse. Every examinee in its path ran, screaming, sprinting, tripping over each other. The carefully maintained composure of aspiring heroes dissolved into pure animal panic, which was, of course, the point. This was UA's real test, not points, but character. One person didn't run, Uraraka. She tried. She really did. But a chunk of concrete had fallen on her ankle during the initial quake, pinning her to the ground. She pulled, clawed at the rubble. The zero-pointer bore down on her, each roll of its treads pulverizing the street beneath it, shaking the earth, filling the air with dust and the shriek of grinding metal. She looked up at the machine that was about to end her exam, and maybe her life, and she screamed. In the monitoring room, several teachers were already on their feet. Recovery Girl was reaching for the emergency shutdown switch. Midnight had her hand over her mouth. Present Mike was leaning forward so far he was practically inside the screen. "Someone's trapped," he said. 3rd Street, Northeast Quadrant. "It's the Gravity Girl. She's pinned." "I see it," Nezu said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Watchful. He was watching the green-haired boy. Izuku had stopped walking. He was 4 blocks away from the zero-pointer. He'd heard the screams, felt the tremors, and turned toward the source. He saw the robot. He saw the girl pinned beneath the rubble. He calculated the distance, the angle, the mass of the target, the energy required, and he made a decision. He walked to the center of the nearest intersection, the widest, most open space available. The sun was directly overhead, noon, dead noon, pouring down through a gap between buildings in a solid shaft of white gold light. Izuku stepped into it, and the world changed. The effect was immediate. The air around him ignited, not with fire, but with light. A golden aura erupted from his skin, visible to the naked eye, turning him into a silhouette wrapped in solar radiance. The temperature in a 10-meter radius spiked so drastically that the asphalt under his feet went soft, then liquid, his shoes sinking slightly into molten tar. Windows nearby cracked from thermal stress. A fire hydrant 20 feet away began to sweat condensation as the moisture in the air superheated and became steam. He raised one hand, slowly, palm up, and above his open palm, a sphere of light began to form. It was small at first, the size of a marble, but it was bright, painfully bright, the kind of bright that you don't look at directly because every instinct in your body tells you it will burn your retinas. The color shifted from gold to white to something beyond white, a shade that didn't have a name because human eyes weren't built to process it. It grew, the size of a baseball, a softball, a basketball. The air screamed. Not metaphorically, the atmosphere around the sphere was being ionized. The molecules vibrating so violently, they produced a high-pitched whine that cut through the noise of the exam like a knife through silk. Examinees who had been running from the zero-pointer stopped, turned around, stared. A boy who could control tape from his elbows froze mid-step. What is that? Kirishima, the red-haired hardener, dropped to one knee, not from an attack, but from the sheer pressure of the heat even from 2 blocks away. Is that a sun? Is that an actual sun? The sphere stabilized at roughly the size of a beach ball. It floated above Izuku's palm. Silent, perfect, devastating. The light it cast was so intense that it created a second set of shadows across the entire battle center. as if a new star had risen from the street level. In the monitoring room, every screen showing Battle Center B was white out. Cameras couldn't handle the luminosity. Technicians scrambled to adjust filters, reduce exposure, get a readable image back on the monitors. When they did, they saw Izuku Midoriya standing in a crater of molten asphalt, a miniature sun hovering above his hand, looking up at the zero-pointer with the calm expression of a man deciding whether to swat a fly. Holy. Present Mike started. Language, Nezu said mildly. Holy heck, Present Mick amended. Not taking his eyes off the screen, Aizawa's coffee was now on the floor. He didn't notice. Izuku spoke, quietly, to himself, under his breath, almost like a prayer. Let there be light. He tossed it. Not through. Tossed. Underhand. Casual. Like lobbing a tennis ball to a child. The miniature sun sailed upward in a gentle arc, leaving a trail of ionized air that glowed like a comet's tail. It crossed the distance between Izuku and the zero-pointer in about 3 seconds, and then it hit. The sphere contacted the robot's center mass, its torso, right where a human's heart would be. And it didn't explode. There was no shockwave, no fiery detonation, no mushroom cloud. That would have been dangerous. That would have been reckless. That would have hurt the girl pinned beneath the rubble. Instead, the miniature sun simply passed through. It entered the front of the zero-pointer's chest and exited through its back, boring a perfect circular tunnel through several tons of reinforced steel, titanium alloy, and military-grade circuitry. The metal didn't break. It melted. It vaporized. The edges of the hole glowed white-hot, then orange, then red, molten steel dripping down the robot's frame in streams of liquid fire. The zero-pointer stopped. Its massive arms went limp. Its optical sensors flickered once, twice, then went dark. And then, with the slow, majestic inevitability of a skyscraper being demolished, it began to topple backward, away from the trapped girl. Because Izuku had calculated the angle, the impact of the zero-pointer's collapse registered on seismographs across the city. The ground shook. Dust billowed upward in massive clouds. The sound was like thunder, deep, rolling, final. And then silence. The dust settled. Izuku walked forward. Through the crater he'd created, across the warped and buckled street, past the stunned, frozen examinees who stood like statues with their jaws hanging open. He reached Uraraka, crouched down, and placed his hands on the rubble pinning her ankle. His palms glowed. Not the blinding, devastating light of his attack. A softer warmth. Gentle. Controlled. The concrete heated evenly, weakening its structure without burning the girl beneath it. He lifted the chunk off her ankle with both hands and set it aside. "Can you stand?" he asked. Uraraka looked up at him. His face was backlit by the sun, the real one, the one in the sky, and for a moment she couldn't tell where the star ended and the boy began. He was glowing, not metaphorically, literally. A soft golden light on his skin, fading slowly as he dialed back his output. His green eyes were calm. Patient, warm. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You," she managed. That was... "Can you stand?" he repeated, same tone, gentle but direct. Yes, I think so." He offered his hand. She took it. His skin was warm, comfortably warm, like sun-heated stone. He pulled her to her feet and steadied her when she wobbled. "Your ankle might be sprained," he said, glancing down. "Don't put weight on it. Recovery girl should be at the medical station." "Thank you," she whispered. And then, because Uraraka Ochako was the kind of person who said exactly what she was thinking, that was the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life. Izuku blinked. A faint dusting of pink crossed his cheeks, the first crack in his composure all day. "It was just physics," he said. He turned and walked away before she could respond. Behind him, the zero-pointer's wreckage groaned and settled, its hollowed-out chest still glowing like a dying ember. Every examinee in Battle Center B was staring at the retreating figure of the quiet boy in the green hoodie, and not a single one of them could form a coherent sentence. In the monitoring room, the silence lasted a solid 15 seconds, which, for a room full of professional heroes, was practically an eternity. Present Mike broke it. "Nezu, sir, what the heck just happened?" "A young man just threw a miniature star at a giant robot," Nezu said, sipping his tea. "Do keep up." His point total, Midnight pulled up the data, 47 villain points, plus... She looked at the screen showing Izuku helping Uraraka. "Rescue points?" "Oh, he's getting rescue points," said a hero in the back. 13. the space hero, who had watched the whole thing from behind their helmet with both hands clasped together. That wasn't just raw power. He calculated the angle of the zero-pointer's fall to ensure it collapsed away from civilians. He modulated his thermal output to avoid injuring anyone nearby. And he helped that girl afterward with a controlled application of heat to weaken the rubble without burning her. That's not just strength. That's a hero's judgment. Aizawa stared at his spilled coffee, then at the screen, then back at his coffee. "I want him in my class," he said flatly. "I believe we all want him in our class," Nezu said, smiling in that unsettling way of his. The final tally for Battle Center B, when it was compiled later that day: Izuku Midoriya. Villain points 47. Rescue points 60.107 total, the highest entrance exam score in UA history. The acceptance letter arrived a week later, delivered by holographic projection, All Might's signature style, a recorded message playing from a disc embedded in the envelope. "I am here, as a projection!" Izuku watched the recording from his desk. All Might, the symbol of peace, the #1 hero, the man every child in Japan wanted to be, grinning his enormous grin, flexuring his enormous muscles, delivering the news with his enormous enthusiasm. "Young Midoriya, you passed the exam with flying colors. Not only did you score the highest villain points in your testing center, but UA's panel of judges also evaluated your heroic conduct and awarded you 60 rescue points. Your total of 107 points is the highest score ever recorded in UA's entrance exam. Congratulations, you are now officially a student of UA High School, Hero Course, Class 1A. All Might leaned toward the camera, his smile somehow getting even wider. "I look forward to seeing what you'll do, young man. The future is bright, and something tells me you'll make it even brighter. Plus Ultra!" The projection ended. Izuku sat in his chair for a moment, quiet, processing. Then he stood up, walked to the kitchen where his mother was pretending not to eavesdrop, and said, "I got in." Inko Midoriya cried for approximately 45 minutes straight. Izuku made her tea, sat with her, and let her hold his hand. He kept his temperature at a perfect, comfortable warmth. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. The sun was setting outside the window, painting the apartment in shades of gold. He was going to UA first day. UA High School was enormous. The campus sprawled across an artificial mountain, all glass and steel and cutting-edge architecture. The main building alone was the size of a shopping mall, with hallways wide enough to accommodate students with size-altering quirks and doors reinforced to withstand accidental explosions. Class 1A was on the first floor. The door was massive. Literally, it was like 20 feet tall, presumably designed for students with gigantification abilities. The number 1A was printed on it in bold letters. Izuku arrived early. Of course he did. He hated crowds, and the hallways of UA in the morning rush would be a nightmare of noise and bodies. He slipped through the front gate at 6:45 a.m., navigated the empty hallways in silence, and pushed open the door to 1A at exactly 6:52. The classroom was empty except for one person, Katsuki Bakugo, sitting in a chair near the back, feet up on the desk, arms crossed. His red eyes, sharp, angry, perpetually combustible, locked onto Izuku the moment the door opened. For a moment, neither of them moved. The classroom was silent. The morning light came in through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the rows of desks. Outside, birds sang. Inside, two boys who had known each other since childhood and had barely spoken in a decade stared at each other across an empty room. Bakugo spoke first. "Ch." That was it. One syllable. But it carried a decade's worth of complicated emotions. Frustration, acknowledgement, rivalry, grudging respect buried so deep under pride that it would take a team of archaeologists to excavate it. Izuku held his gaze for a beat. Then he walked to the opposite side of the room, chose a seat by the window, maximum sunlight exposure, and sat down. He pulled out a book. Bakugo watched him for another few seconds. Then he looked away, jaw tight, and stared at the ceiling. Neither said another word. The rest of Class 1A filtered in over the next hour, and if you've never watched 20 teenagers with superpowers try to introduce themselves in a confined space, you're missing out. It was glorious chaos. The tall boy with glasses arrived first. Tenya Ida, son of the Ingenium hero family, uptight as a drum, already lecturing the empty desks about proper seating posture. He spotted Izuku reading by the window and marched over. "Excuse me. I am Tenya Ida, from Some Academy. I must say, I witnessed your performance during the entrance exam via the post-exam review footage, and I was deeply impressed. Your combination of raw power and strategic precision was exemplary. Izuku looked up from his book. Thanks. Ida waited for more. More did not come. I see. Well, I look forward to learning alongside you. Ida bowed at exactly a 90-degree angle and marched to his seat. Uraraka bounced in shortly after her, all smiles and energy. She spotted Izuku immediately. Oh, you, the sun boy from the exam. A few heads turned at sun boy. Izuku's eye twitched almost imperceptibly. Midoriya, he said. Izuku Midoriya. Right, Midoriya, I'm Uraraka Ochako. You totally saved me during the exam. That thing you did with the giant robot was insane. I've been thinking about it for a week, and I still can't believe it. How did you even... Were you always that? Does it hurt when you... Uraraka. Yes? Breathe. She laughed, bright and genuine. Sorry, I talk a lot when I'm nervous. First day and all. I noticed, Izuku said, but there was the faintest hint of warmth in his voice. Not thermal, emotional. The ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Uraraka beamed and took the seat next to him. Izuku didn't object. He went back to his book, and she started chatting about the campus and her hero aspirations. And somewhere in the next 10 minutes, a dynamic established itself. She talked. He listened, and it worked. The classroom filled up. Kirishima came in grinning, immediately tried to arm wrestle everyone. A girl with invisible skin knocked over a chair and apologized profusely to the air. A boy with multiple arms sat down and opened 6 textbooks simultaneously. A tiny purple-haired kid tried to look down Yaoyorozu's shirt and got elbowed in the face by Jiro's earphone jack. Bakugo sat in the back and radiated hostility like a space heater set to rage. And Izuku sat by the window, bathed in morning sunlight, and observed them all. Then the door opened, slowly, and from beneath what appeared to be a bright yellow sleeping bag, a man slithered into the classroom like a caterpillar that had given up on becoming a butterfly. Shuda Aizawa, homeroom teacher, underground hero, professional insomniac, he stood up, slowly, as if the act of being vertical was a personal offense, and surveyed the class with bloodshot eyes that held all the warmth and enthusiasm of a damp sock. My name is Shuda Aizawa. I'm your homeroom teacher. Put on your gym clothes and meet me outside. We're doing a quirk assessment test. No introduction, no welcome speech, no pleasantries. Izuku closed his book. This was going to be interesting. The quirk assessment test was Aizawa's signature welcome to hell exercise. 8 physical tests, 50-meter dash, grip strength, standing long jump, repeated side steps, ball throw, sit-ups, seated toe touch, distance run, all performed using quirks. The person who placed last would be judged to have no potential and expelled on the spot. That's not fair, someone protested. Aizawa's expression didn't change. Natural disasters, villain attacks, highway pileups, these things aren't fair either. If you can't push beyond what's normal, you don't belong here. The class went quiet. Aizawa tossed a softball to Bakugo. Bakugo, you scored highest in the practical. Throw this ball using your quirk. Your middle school record was 67 meters. Let's see what you can do without restrictions. Bakugo grinned. Savage. All teeth. He wound up, put everything into it, detonated a massive explosion in his palm at the point of release, and sent the ball screaming into the sky. Boom. The class watched it arc upward, trailing smoke. Aizawa held up a device, 705.2 meters. Gasps, impressed murmurs. Bakugo turned to the class, hands in his pockets, absolutely drenched in smug satisfaction. That's what real power looks like. Aizawa was already holding a second softball. His eyes, those tired, calculating, constantly assessing eyes, drifted to the green-haired boy standing at the back of the group, hands in his pockets, watching the sky. Midoriya, you're up. The class shifted, whispered. Most of them didn't know who Izuku was or what he could do. They'd heard rumors about the entrance exam, something about melted robots and a sun, but rumors were just rumors. Izuku walked forward, took the ball from Aizawa's hand. Their eyes met briefly, and Aizawa felt it. The heat. Subtle, but there, like standing next to an idling engine. Your registered quirk is listed as fire type, Aizawa said neutrally. Is that accurate? Broadly, Izuku said, something about the way he said broadly made Aizawa's left eyebrow rise exactly 2 millimeters. Izuku walked to the throwing circle, stood there, looked at the ball in his hand. Then he looked up. The sun was high, mid-morning. His reserves were near full. He tossed the ball in the air once. Caught it, considering. The class watched. He placed the ball in his right palm, extended his arm, and then he heated the air behind the ball. Not fire. Not an explosion. He created a localized pocket of superheated air directly behind the ball, a thermal launch system. The air expanded violently, creating a pressure differential that launched the ball forward at a speed that produced a visible shockwave. The ball left his hand and vanished. Literally vanished. It broke the sound barrier so fast that most students didn't see it leave. They just heard the crack and felt the concussive wave of displaced air. Aizawa held up the device. The number on the screen read C, or rather, it tried to read set. The ball had exited the device's tracking range. The sensor couldn't calculate a landing point because the ball was still going up. Aizawa and the class watched as a faint golden streak climbed higher and higher into the blue sky, burning like a tiny falling star in reverse. It did not come down, not while they were watching. The ball... Ida adjusted his glasses, squinting skyward. The ball appears to have achieved escape velocity. It's in orbit, Izuku said simply. He handed the imaginary second ball back to Aizawa, then paused because there was no second ball. He'd thrown the only one. Into space. I should have used less, he added. The class was silent for a solid 5 seconds. Then Kirishima lost his entire mind. That was the most manly thing I've ever seen. Did he just throw a ball into space? Like, into actual space? Kaminari, the electric boy, was on his knees, literally on his knees. We're classmates with him. We go to school with this guy. This is real life. Yaoyorozu had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide, running the physics in her head and arriving at numbers that shouldn't be possible for a 15-year-old. Bakugo. Bakugo was standing perfectly still. His face was blank. Not angry, not scowling, just blank. Which, for Bakugo, was more terrifying than any explosion. 705.2 meters. Versus infinity. He didn't say a word, his fists clenched at his sides. The skin on his palms popped with tiny, involuntary explosions like a pot about to boil over. But he didn't move, didn't shout, didn't attack. He just stared at Izuku's back with an intensity that could have melted steel on its own. Aizawa looked at the reading, looked at Izuku, looked at the sky, where the ball was presumably bothering a satellite somewhere. Right, he said. Everyone else, you're up. The rest of the quirk assessment test was for Izuku, a controlled demonstration. He didn't showboat, didn't push his limits. He performed each test efficiently, using just enough of his quirk to score well without destroying the testing equipment. 50-meter dash. He heated the air behind himself, creating a thermal jet that propelled him across the track in 1.3 seconds. The track surface bubbled and warped behind him. Grip strength. He superheated his grip, softening the metal of the dynamometer, which skewed the reading. He apologized and crushed it with pure physical strength instead. 280 kilograms. No quirk. He'd been training for 10 years. Standing, long jump, thermal launch, same principle as the ball throw. He cleared the sandbox entirely and landed on the next field over. Aizawa just wrote, cleared on the clipboard. Ball throw was already recorded as infinite. And so on. By the end, the rankings were clear. Izuku Midoriya sat at the top. Comfortably, indisputably, by a margin that was honestly kind of embarrassing for everyone else. None of you are being expelled, Aizawa said at the end, pocketing his device. That was a logical ruse to make you take the test seriously. A logical ruse? Several students screamed. Aizawa was already walking away, sleeping bag tucked under his arm, but he paused, turned his head just enough to look back at Izuku, who was standing apart from the group, hands in his pockets watching the clouds. Midoriya. Yes, sensei? Control, power, and restraint. You have all three. A pause. Don't make me regret noticing that. Izuku nodded, Aizawa turned away, and the ghost of something that might have been approval crossed his exhausted face before vanishing entirely. The first week at UA established a rhythm. Izuku was, predictably, an academic powerhouse. His years of solitary study had made him one of the most knowledgeable students in the class on quirk theory, hero law, and tactical analysis. His written test scores were second only to Yaoyorozu's, and only because she had formal education from private tutors. Socially, though, Izuku was an island, not unfriendly, never rude. He answered questions when asked, participated in group activities when required, and treated every classmate with quiet respect. But he didn't seek anyone out. He ate lunch alone on the roof. He sat by the window and read during free periods. He walked home by himself, always choosing the route with the most sun exposure. This drove certain people absolutely crazy. Midoriya! Kirishima slid into the seat next to him at lunch on the third day. Come eat with us, man. Kaminari found this awesome spot in the cafeteria where you can see the support course labs. I appreciate it, Izuku said. I'm fine here. But dude, you're always alone. That can't be. Kirishima. Yeah? I like being alone. It's not a problem I need solved, but thank you. Kirishima stared at him, then grinned that huge sharp-toothed grin of his. All right, man, but the offer's always open. He left, and the next day, without a word, he left a juice box on Izuku's desk before heading to the cafeteria. Izuku stared at it for a long moment, then drank it. Uraraka was more persistent. She had claimed the seat next to Izuku as her territory and defended it with cheerful ferocity. She talked to him every day, about classes, about heroes, about her family's construction company back home, about whatever random thought entered her head. Izuku listened, always listened. And sometimes when she said something genuinely funny or insightful, that ghost of a smile would appear, and Uraraka would feel like she'd won the lottery. You know, she told Ida one day, watching Izuku read across the classroom, he's actually really warm, like not just his quirk. He listens to everything you say, really listens. Most people don't do that. He is certainly attentive, Ida agreed, though he was clearly still trying to figure out how to interact with someone who communicated primarily in single sentences and meaningful silences. Todoroki Shoto sat on the other side of the classroom and watched Izuku from a distance. The half-cold, half-hot son of Endeavor. Heterochromatic eyes, burn scar, enough family trauma to fill a therapy textbook, recognized something in Izuku. Not the power, though that was impossible to ignore. Something else. The way he held himself apart. The way he controlled every aspect of his being with deliberate precision. The way he looked at the world with those calm, assessing eyes, as if he was constantly reading a book that only he could see. Todoroki recognized it because he did the same thing. He didn't approach Izuku. Not yet, but he filed him away. A variable worth monitoring. And Bakugo? Bakugo was at war with himself. He'd expected Yue to confirm what he'd always known, that he was the best, the strongest, the chosen one. And then Izuku Midoriya, the quiet kid from his childhood, the one person who had ever made him doubt that certainty, had walked into the same classroom and casually thrown a ball into orbit. Bakugo didn't challenge Izuku, didn't confront him, didn't make a scene. Instead, he trained harder, earlier, longer, louder. He attacked every exercise, every simulation, every sparring match with a ferocity that bordered on self-destruction. If Izuku was going to be a mountain, Bakugo was going to be the explosion that moved it. It was, in its own destructive way, the most growth Bakugo had ever experienced. But that's a different thread for a different time. 3 weeks into the semester, the world broke in. The USJ, Unforeseen Simulation Joint, a massive training facility on UA's campus designed to simulate natural disaster zones, flood zones, landslide areas, conflagration sectors, collapse zones, all under a giant glass dome, controlled and safe, or it was supposed to be safe. Class 1A arrived at the USJ for a rescue training exercise with 13, the space hero. The dome was vast. You could fit a small city inside it, and in a way, that's exactly what they'd done. Different biomes, different scenarios, all centered around a main plaza with a fountain. Aizawa was there. So was 13. 20 students, 2 heroes, 1 training day. And then the air at the center of the plaza split open. Purple-black mist swirled into existence like a wound in reality. It expanded, thickened, formed a gate. And through that gate, figures began to emerge. Dozens of them, then scores. Villains with mutant quirks and mechanical augments and the hungry, desperate eyes of people who had nothing left to lose. At the front of the horde, 2 figures stood out. The first was thin, pale, covered in severed hands that clung to his body like grotesque accessories. He moved with a twitchy, unstable energy, like a man perpetually one bad thought away from snapping. His red eyes peered through the gaps between the fingers of the hand covering his face. Tamura Shigaraki, leader of the League of Villains. Quirk, decay. 5-finger contact, and anything he touched crumbled to dust. The second was mist. Literally, a figure made of dark purple fog, with glowing yellow eyes floating in the void of its form. Kurogiri. Quirk, Warp Gate. The reason they were able to bypass UA security in the first place, and behind them, held in reserve like a loaded weapon, was the Thing. It stood 7 feet tall. Its brain was exposed, a grotesque bulge of gray matter visible through its open skull. Its body was a mass of hyperdeveloped muscle, dark-skinned with a beak-like mouth and empty dead eyes. It didn't fidget or posture or snarl. It just stood there, breathing, waiting. The Nomu, engineered to kill. 13. Aizawa's voice snapped through the shock. His capture scarf was already in his hands, his eyes glowing red as he activated his erasure. Protect the students! Get them out of here! Sensei, you can't fight them alone. I'm not asking. Aizawa launched himself down the stairs toward the horde of villains, alone, against a small army, because that's what heroes do. And for a while, he did, brilliantly. His fighting style was brutal efficiency. He erased quirks with his gaze, used his capture scarf to immobilize and throw, leveraged the villains' confusion against them. He tore through the first wave like a buzzsaw, but Shigaraki saw the pattern. His eyes? Shigaraki muttered, scratching his neck. Scratch, scratch, scratch. He needs to look at you to erase your quirk, and he can't erase mutant types. How annoying, how predictable. Nomu. The Nomu moved. 1 second it was standing behind Shigaraki. The next it was in front of Aizawa, moving with a speed that something that large had no right to possess. Aizawa tried to dodge. Too slow. The Nomu grabbed his arm and slammed him into the concrete. Once. Twice. 3 times. The sound of bones breaking echoed across the plaza. From the top of the stairs, Class 1A watched their teacher get brutalized. Some screamed. Some froze. Ida, following 13's desperate instructions, tried to rally a group toward the exit. Kurogiri appeared, blocking the door, scattering students through warp gates to different zones across the facility. Chaos, but one student was not screaming, was not frozen, was not panicking. Izuku Midoriya stood at the railing of the upper level, looking down at the scene with those calm, observant eyes. He was processing, not in slow motion, not in some dramatic internal monologue, just fast, efficient. The way he'd been trained to process things for a decade, he saw. Shigaraki. Close-range quirk. Needs 5-point contact. Relies on the Nomu for heavy combat. Dangerous in melee range. Manageable at distance. He saw Kurogiri warp quirk, body made of mist, metal collar at the base of his neck that was probably his physical weak point. Could teleport allies, redirect attacks, high utility, low durability. He saw the Nomu, heavy hitter, extreme strength, extreme speed, absorbed Aizawa's punch without flinching. His eye went to the exposed brain, the overdeveloped muscle, the way the Nomu's body had taken concrete impacts during the fight without showing damage. Shock absorption. That was the quirk. Maybe regeneration too, based on the way minor scratches were closing in real time. He saw the dome. Glass. Cloud cover rolling in from the west, already blocking portions of the sun. The interior was lit by artificial lights, but those weren't the same. Couldn't charge him. Couldn't fuel him. He was on reserves. All of this took about 6 seconds. Then Aizawa screamed as the Nomu pressed his face into the concrete. Izuku moved. Not ran. Dropped. He vaulted over the railing, fell 20 feet to the plaza floor, and landed in a crouch that cracked the tile beneath him. His body was already radiating heat, the air around him distorting. Midoriya, no! Someone shouted from above. Ida, probably. Always following the rules. Izuku didn't respond. He was already crossing the plaza, moving with a controlled, ground-eating stride that was somehow more intimidating than a sprint, because sprinting implied urgency, desperation, panic. Izuku's walk said, "I am coming to you and there is nothing you can do about it." Shigaraki noticed. Turned. Tilted his head, hands still scratching his neck. Another one? Scratch, scratch. A student? Nomu? Kill? Izuku reached them. What happened next took about 8 seconds and rewrote the League of Villains' understanding of what a UA first year could do. Izuku placed both palms flat on the Nomu's exposed back. The Nomu was still holding Aizawa down. It didn't perceive Izuku as a threat. It was engineered to kill All Might, after all. What could a student? Heat, not an explosion, not a fireball, not a dramatic burst of golden light, just heat. Pure, focused, relentless, channeled directly from Izuku's palms into the Nomu's body at a cellular level. Solar-class thermal energy driven inward like a spike, bypassing the Nomu's skin, bypassing its shock absorption, because there was no shock, no impact, no kinetic force to absorb, just heat. Shock absorption, Izuku whispered. Calm, clinical, like a surgeon making an observation during an operation. Designed to nullify kinetic impacts, but how do your cells respond to absolute heat? The Nomu's skin blackened under his palms. Not burned, cooked. The thermal energy penetrated through muscle, through fascia, through organ tissue, disrupting cellular structures at a molecular level. The Nomu's regeneration kicked in immediately, new cells forming, tissue trying to rebuild, but Izuku was faster, hotter. The regeneration healed, and he cooked the healed tissue again, establishing a cycle the Nomu's body couldn't win. The Nomu screamed. If you've never heard an engineered bioweapon scream, consider yourself blessed. The sound was inhuman, a raw, tearing shriek that echoed off the glass dome and froze every person in the facility, hero and villain alike. The Nomu released Aizawa. Its hands scrabbled at its own chest, where the skin was blistering from the inside out. It staggered backwards, smoke rising from its body, the stench of burning flesh filling the air. Izuku didn't let go. He stepped forward as the Nomu retreated, maintaining palm contact, driving more heat inward. His face was focused. Not angry, not vindictive, just completely, utterly locked in. His green eyes reflected the golden glow of his own hands, and the shadows on his face made him look like something out of myth. "Nomu!" Shigaraki shrieked. His calm had shattered. The hand on his face was askew, and his red eyes were wide with something he hadn't felt in a long time. "Get away from Nomu! Fight back!" The Nomu tried. It swung a massive fist at Izuku, a blow that would have splattered a normal person across the plaza. Izuku ducked under it without removing his hands from the Nomu's torso. The fist sailed over his head and obliterated a section of fountain behind him. He channeled harder. The Nomu's screaming intensified. Its regeneration was failing. The thermal damage was too fast, too deep, too fundamental. You can regenerate cells, but you can't regenerate cells that are being vaporized faster than they can form. Steam began to pour from the Nomu's body. Not metaphorical steam, literal water vapor. As the fluids in its tissues boiled, the creature's legs buckled. It dropped to its knees. Izuku stood over it, palms still pressed to its chest, heat pouring into the beast like a furnace. He looked down at the Nomu with no triumph, no satisfaction, no pleasure, just the grim focus of someone doing a necessary and unpleasant job. "Stay down," he said, and pushed. One final surge of concentrated solar energy, driven through his palms like a defibrillator made of starfire. The Nomu's body seized, its eyes went blank, its mouth opened in a silent scream, and then it collapsed, face first, hitting the plaza floor with a thud that shook the ground. It didn't get up. Steam rose from its body. The skin where Izuku's palms had been was charred black and cracked, glowing faintly with residual heat. The regeneration was still trying, cells flickering, twitching, reforming at the edges of the burns, but the core damage was done. The Nomu was alive but broken. Izuku stood over it, breathing evenly. His palms were red and raw. The output had cost him physically, even with his tolerance. His reserves had taken a hit too. That sustained internal heating had eaten through a significant portion of his stored solar energy. But he was standing, and the Nomu was not. Silence. Absolute silence. Then Shigaraki spoke. His voice had changed. The twitchy irritation, the childlike petulance, gone, replaced by something colder, quieter, more dangerous. "That's not possible. The Nomu was designed to fight all might. It was supposed to be perfect, unbeatable, and you're just..." He stared at Izuku. Izuku stared back. Green eyes. Red eyes. Across a broken plaza over the steaming body of a fallen monster. "You're just a kid," Shigaraki finished. And then he laughed. Not a big laugh. A small, cracked, unstable sound like a window giving way under pressure. A kid. Sensei spent so much time worrying about All Might, and there's a kid at UA who can just cook the Nomu from the inside out. He scratched his neck. Hard enough to draw blood. "This isn't fair," he whispered. "This isn't how the game is supposed to work." "It's not a game," Izuku said. First time he'd spoken to Shigaraki directly. His voice was quiet, steady, absolutely level. No tremor. No bravado. Shigaraki flinched, actually flinched, a visible full-body recoil, as if Izuku's words had physical weight. Because in that moment, looking at the green-haired boy standing calmly in the ruins of the plaza with a defeated Nomu at his feet, and not a shred of fear in his eyes, Tamura Shigaraki, student of All for One, leader of the League of Villains, a man who had killed with a touch and smiled about it, felt something he hadn't felt since he was a lost child wandering the streets of an indifferent city. fear, not of the fire, not of the quirk, of the boy, of the absolute, unshakable certainty in those green eyes that said, I will not break and I will not bend, and if you threaten these people again, I will end you. Kurogiri, Shigaraki said. His voice was tight, controlled, but his hand was shaking. We're leaving. But Tomura Shigaraki, now. The warp gate opened. Shigaraki stepped through without looking back. Kurogiri followed, the purple mist swallowing them both. They were gone. The plaza was quiet. The remaining low-level villains, seeing their leaders flee and their weapon defeated, either surrendered or tried to run. They didn't get far. Police and backup heroes were already arriving, responding to the alarms that had been triggered the moment the invasion began. Izuku looked down at Aizawa. His teacher was badly hurt, broken arm, fractured orbital bone, facial lacerations, but alive, conscious even, one bloodshot eye staring up at Izuku from the broken concrete. Sensei, help is coming. Aizawa stared at him. Then, through the pain and the blood and the exhaustion, he said, "Good work, Midoriya." 2 words. From Aizawa, that was practically a standing ovation. The aftermath of the USJ attack was pandemonium. Media, police, government officials, parent complaints, emergency board meetings. The fact that a group of villains had infiltrated UA's campus and attacked a class of first years was a scandal of seismic proportions. It dominated the news for weeks, and somewhere in all the coverage, a piece of footage leaked, grainy, shot from a security camera at a bad angle but unmistakable. A green-haired boy, glowing golden, standing over the fallen body of a monster that was supposed to be unbeatable. The internet went insane. Who is this kid? UA student takes down anti-All Might weapons solo. Is this the next #1 hero? Bro, he just cooked that thing from the inside. I'm literally shaking. The green sun has risen. That last one became a trending hashtag. The Green Sun. It wasn't a hero name. Izuku didn't have one yet, but the internet didn't wait for official branding. They made their own. Izuku hated it, not the recognition. He understood that being a hero meant being public. He hated the noise, the attention, the way people looked at him in the hallways now. Not just classmates, but upperclassmen, teachers, like support course students who wanted to study his thermal output. He was asked for interviews 6 times in 1 week. He declined all 6. You should do at least one, Uraraka suggested, sitting next to him at lunch. She'd started joining him on the roof, bringing her own bento and chattering while he ate in companionable silence. People are really curious about you. It might be good for your hero career. I don't need people to be curious about me, Izuku said. I need them to be safe. Uraraka looked at him, and something in her chest did a thing that she was very firmly not going to think about right now. You're really something, Midoriya, she said softly. He glanced at her, held her gaze for a moment, then looked back at the sky. So are you, Uraraka. Her face turned the color of a tomato. She shoved an entire rice ball into her mouth to avoid having to respond. The UA Sports Festival. Once a year, UA opened its doors to the world. The Sports Festival was the biggest event in the Japanese hero industry, a showcase of the next generation's talent, broadcast live to millions, watched by professional heroes, agencies, and sponsors looking for fresh recruits. For most students, it was a career-making opportunity, a chance to show the world what they could do. For Izuku, it was a stadium full of screaming people and cameras everywhere, his personal nightmare. You look like you'd rather be literally anywhere else, Uraraka observed, watching him from the tunnel entrance as the opening ceremonies blared outside. I'd rather be literally anywhere else, Izuku confirmed. Come on, it'll be fun. There's competition, there's food, there's 80,000 people in an enclosed space plus cameras. Okay, yeah, I can see why that's not your thing. But think of it this way. This is your chance to show the world that you're not just the USJ clip. You're more than one moment. Izuku looked at her. I don't need the world to see me, Uraraka. Maybe not, but maybe the world needs to see you. He didn't have a response to that. Uraraka smiled. She was getting better at finding the cracks in his armor. And headed out to the field, Izuku stood in the tunnel for a moment. Then he followed. The first event was an obstacle race. All 11 classes, all courses, one massive sprint through a series of deadly obstacles. First 42 to finish advance. Midnight, the R-rated hero and chief referee cracked her whip. Start! Stampede. 200 students crammed through a single tunnel exit, quirks flaring, elbows flying. Todoroki made his move immediately. A massive wave of ice that froze the ground and half the students in place, launching himself forward on a frozen slide. Bakugo blasted over the crowd, explosions propelling him through the air, screaming something incoherent about being first. Izuku walked. The crowd in the tunnel parted around him unconsciously, not because he pushed them, because his body temperature was rising and standing within 3 feet of him was increasingly uncomfortable. Students peeled away, pressing against the tunnel walls, giving him a clear path without even understanding why they were doing it. He emerged from the tunnel into sunlight. Noon, peak charging hours. The warmth hit his skin and his reserves surged. The first obstacle was a field of giant robots, the same types from the entrance exam, now repurposed as barriers. Todoroki had already frozen several. Bakugo was blowing them apart overhead. Other students fought, climbed, squeezed past. Izuku pointed. One beam. The robot between him and the path forward developed a glowing hole through its center and toppled sideways, clearing the way. He kept walking. Through the robot field. Through the canyon zone. A massive chasm crossed by tightrope-thin platforms. He didn't balance on the ropes. He heated the air beneath himself, creating a thermal updraft that carried him across the gap in a gentle, controlled glide. Through the minefield. Every mine within his thermal radius detonated prematurely from the ambient heat, clearing a path without him having to touch anything. He finished third. Behind Todoroki, who had the advantage of a head start and an obstacle course that favored his ice. Behind Bakugo, who flew the entire thing. Ahead of literally everyone else, he'd walked the entire course. Present Mike lost his mind on the commentary. Izuku Midoriya finishes third, and he walked. He walked the obstacle race. He didn't run a single step. Is this guy even trying? The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or question reality. The second event was a cavalry battle. Teams of 4, headbands worth point values based on placement in the obstacle race. The first place headband was worth 10 million. Todoroki had that headband. He was the immediate target. Izuku's headband was worth the third place value. Still high. Still a target. Teams formed quickly. In the frantic scramble of alliances, 3 people found their way to Izuku. Uraraka, because of course. I trust you. Let's do this. Tokoyami Fumikage, the bird-headed boy with the shadow quirk, Dark Shadow. He approached Izuku with a respectful nod. Your power is light-based? My dark shadow is vulnerable to light but powerful in darkness. Together we control both spectrums. Izuku looked at him. Smart. I appreciate the efficiency of your speech. And Shoji Mezo, the tall, multi-armed boy with the ability to replicate body parts. Quiet, reliable. The kind of teammate Izuku respected, competent and not requiring constant management. Their strategy was Izuku's. Tokoyami's dark shadow formed a defensive perimeter. A sentient shadow creature that intercepted incoming attacks. Shoji provided physical stability and reconnaissance with his replicated ears and eyes. Uraraka used her gravity nullification to keep the team light and mobile, and Izuku was the deterrent, because nobody wanted to get close enough to the boy who could melt steel with a look. Teams veered away instinctively. The ones that didn't, the ones brave or foolish enough to try, found themselves retreating the moment the air started to shimmer. One team got close. A boy with a copying quirk lunged for Izuku's headband. Izuku flared his aura, just a pulse, barely more than a flicker, and the boy's hand recoiled from the heat a foot from Izuku's face. I wouldn't, Izuku said. The boy did not. They advanced comfortably into the tournament bracket with their headband intact. The tournament bracket, one-on-one fights, single elimination. This was what the crowd had been waiting for. The matchups were random. Izuku scanned the bracket board. His path was clear. First round against a student from the General Studies course, Hitoshi Shinso, a mind control quirk. Then, if he advanced, increasingly difficult opponents. But the match everyone was buzzing about, the one that had the commentators speculating and the audience vibrating, was the semi-final projection. Izuku Midoriya versus Shoto Todoroki. Fire versus Ice, the Green Sun versus Endeavor's Sun. This is going to be insane, Kirishima said from the stands, practically bouncing. 2 heavy hitters, 2 quiet dudes. This is like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. Todoroki only uses his ice, Yaoyorozu noted. He refuses to use his fire side. Against Midoriya, Kaminari laughed nervously. He's going to need his fire side. He's going to need a miracle side. First match, Izuku versus Shinso. Shinso was clever. He stood at the far side of the ring, hands in his pockets, purple hair wild, bags under his eyes almost as impressive as Aizawa's. "So you're the big deal, huh?" Shinso called out. "The sun boy, must be nice having a quirk that does all the work." Bait. Obvious bait. If Izuku responded verbally, Shinso's brainwashing would activate. Izuku had done his research. He said nothing. He walked forward. Crossed the ring. Shinso tried again. "What, too good to talk? Think you're above everyone because you got a flashy quirk?" But Izuku didn't engage. He simply walked up to Shinso, gently placed one warm hand on his shoulder, and pushed him backward out of bounds. It wasn't violent. It wasn't dramatic. Shinso's feet crossed the white line and Midnight called it. Shinso is out of bounds. Midoriya advances. The crowd was stunned, not by the result, but by the method. No fire, no beam, no spectacle. Just a boy who refused to be baited and ended the fight with a nudge. Shinso stared at him from beyond the line. Izuku met his gaze. "Your quirk is powerful," Izuku said. First words he'd spoken in the ring. "You'd make a great hero. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Shinso's eyes widened. Izuku walked away. In the stands, Aizawa quietly wrote something in his notebook and circled it twice. The matches progressed. Izuku moved through his bracket efficiently. He fought a boy with a vine quirk. The vines dried and crumbled in his thermal field before they could touch him. He fought a girl who could manipulate metal. He melted the metal she threw at him mid-air, turning her projectiles into harmless droplets of liquid steel that hit the ground sizzling. Clean. Decisive. Unspectacular, in a way, because Izuku never needed a second move. The gap between him and his opponents was so wide that the fights felt less like battles and more like demonstrations. "Is it just me?" Kaminari said from the stands, "or is Midoriya kind of holding back?" "Definitely holding back," Kirishima said. "Like, massively. He hasn't used anything close to what he did at the entrance exam or the USJ. He's conserving," Bakugo said from 3 seats away. He hadn't moved or spoken in an hour, just watching every match with burning intensity. He knows the real fight is coming. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised he'd contributed. Bakugo's jaw tightened. "Stop staring at me." They stopped. Semifinals. The match. The stadium was packed. 80,000 seats filled to capacity. Every screen in Japan tuned to this fight. The commentators, Present Meek and Aizawa, were in the booth, and even Aizawa had straightened up slightly in his chair. "Ladies and gentlemen," Present Mike's voice boomed across the stadium. "This is the match you've been waiting for." On the left, the boy who walked the obstacle race, who defeated a Nomu at the USJ, who has swept through this tournament without breaking a sweat, Izuku Midoriya. The crowd roared. Izuku walked out of the tunnel, squinting against the wall of noise, and took his position. The midday sun was directly overhead. He could feel it on his skin like a hand on his shoulder. On the right, the son of the number 2 hero Endeavor, recommended student, master of ice, who has frozen every opponent in his path, Shoto Todoroki. Todoroki emerged from the opposite tunnel. Calm, cold. Literally, frost was already creeping along his right side. His heterochromatic eyes, gray and turquoise, were locked on Izuku. The two boys faced each other across the ring. The stadium hushed. 80,000 people held their breath. Midnight raised her whip. "Begin." Todoroki attacked immediately. He stamped his right foot, and a glacier erupted from the ground. A massive wave of ice, towering 30 feet high, rushing toward Izuku with the speed and power of an avalanche. It was the same move he'd used to one-shot every previous opponent. A wall of frozen force that buried anything in its path, it reached Izuku, and it stopped. Not like hitting a wall, not like being blocked. It just ceased. 3 meters from Izuku's body, the ice hit his ambient thermal field and underwent an instant phase change, solid to liquid to gas, all in a fraction of a second. The leading edge of the glacier sublimated, went directly from ice to steam without passing through water, creating an explosion of white vapor that filled the arena. The crowd gasped. Through the steam, Izuku was visible as a golden silhouette, standing in the exact same spot. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't raised a hand. The ice hadn't touched him. Incredible. Present Mike screamed. Todoroki's glacier, the same move that ended every previous match, just evaporated before it reached Midoriya. The temperature differential is literally converting ice into steam on contact. In the stands, Endeavor leaned forward. The number 2 hero, massive, flame-bearded, intense, had been watching the tournament with barely concealed impatience, waiting for his son to use his fire. But now his eyes were on the other boy, the one made of light. "What is this?" Endeavor murmured. "That's not fire. That's not combustion. That's solar energy, I believe," said the aide next to him. Endeavor didn't respond. His eyes narrowed. Back in the ring, Todoroki launched again, another glacier, larger, denser. He poured everything into it, the ice forming so fast that it crackled like gunfire, the temperature on his side of the ring dropping below freezing. It hit Izuku's field. Steam, again and again and again. 5 attacks, 5 glaciers, each one bigger than the last, and each one dissolving into nothing before it reached the green-haired boy standing in the center of a growing cloud of warm vapor. Todoroki was breathing hard. Frost covered the right side of his body, the telltale sign of overuse. His body temperature was dropping. He was freezing himself. Izuku walked forward, through the steam, slowly. The vapor parted around him like curtains, his golden glow turning the mist into a luminous haze that made him look ethereal. He emerged from the cloud 3 meters in front of Todoroki and stopped. "You're freezing, Todoroki." Todoroki gritted his teeth. "I'm fine." "You're not. Your body temperature is dropping dangerously. Your right side is compensating for the cold, but it can't keep up forever. You're rejecting half of yourself to spite your father, but all you're doing is leaving yourself in the cold." Todoroki's eyes widened. "How do you?" "I watch people. It's what I do." Izuku's voice was quiet. Not condescending, not lecturing, just direct, just honest. Spoken as if the 80,000 people in the stands and the millions watching at home didn't exist. As if it was just 2 boys in a ring, one shivering and one glowing. "Your father is a terrible man," Izuku continued. "I've read the reports. I know what he did to your family, and you have every right to hate him. But your left side isn't his. It's yours. Your fire, your choice, your power. When you reject it, you don't hurt him. You hurt yourself." Todoroki was shaking, not from cold, from something deeper. "You don't know what it's like," he whispered, "to look at your own hands and see his face." "No," Izuku said, "I don't. But I know what it's like to have a power that scares you, to be afraid of what you are, what you might do to the people you love. I spent years learning to control what I am, so I wouldn't burn everyone around me." He took a step closer. The warmth radiating from his body reached Todoroki. Not burning, not aggressive, warm, like sunlight through a window, like a blanket on a cold night, like everything Todoroki's childhood never was. "You're cold, Todoroki. You've been cold your whole life, and I'm telling you, you don't have to be." He raised his hand, not as a weapon, palm up, open, an invitation. "Let me show you what true warmth feels like." His golden aura flared. The entire ring was bathed in light, soft, rich, golden light that chased away every shadow, every chill, every cold thing in its radius. The frost on Todoroki's right side began to melt. The ice on the ground turned to water, then to warm mist. The air itself became summer. Todoroki stared at the boy glowing like the sun in front of him, stared at the open hand, stared at those calm green eyes that held no judgment, no pity, no agenda. Just warmth. And something inside Shoto Todoroki, something that had been frozen since he was 5 years old, since the day his mother burned his face, since the day his father turned his childhood into a training camp, cracked. Tears, actual tears, running down his face, evaporating from his left cheek before they could fall because his skin was heating up. His left side, Endeavor's side, his mother's nightmare, the half of himself he'd sworn to bury, ignited. Flame erupted from his left arm, his left shoulder, curling up around his face in a corona of orange and red. For the first time in years, Shoto Todoroki used his fire. The crowd erupted. 80,000 people on their feet, screaming because they could feel the shift. They didn't know the details. They didn't know about Endeavor's abuse, about the burn scar, about a little boy who sealed away half his power to defy a monster, but they could feel it. The way you feel a thunderstorm breaking or a sunrise after a long night, something had changed, and it was monumental. In the stands, Endeavor shot to his feet. His face was a war. Pride, shock, hunger, something that might have been emotion if it wasn't buried under years of narcissism. "Shoto!" he bellowed. "Yes, that's my..." "It's not yours," said a woman in the crowd behind him, so quietly that only the people nearby heard. Nobody knew who she was. But she was right. Aizawa in the commentary booth stopped talking. He just watched. His pen was still. His coffee was untouched. Well, Present Mike asked, for once speaking softly, "You gonna say something?" Aizawa was quiet for a long moment. Then, that kid didn't just win a fight. He broke a cage. Back in the ring, Todoroki stood wreathed in fire and frost, both sides blazing, his face wet with tears but his eyes clear for the first time in years. "You're right," he said to Izuku. "I've been cold." Izuku nodded. "You don't have to be. Not anymore." Todoroki's fire roared. He attacked, not out of rage, but out of release. Everything he'd held back, everything he'd locked away, came pouring out in a typhoon of flame that turned the ring into an inferno. It was the strongest attack Todoroki had ever launched. Fire and ice combined, a dual-element storm of staggering power. Izuku raised one hand. His golden aura expanded. The solar fire met Todoroki's flame and consumed it, not violently, gently, like a river absorbing a tributary. Todoroki's fire was impressive, powerful, genuinely devastating. But Izuku's power was the sun, and no flame, no matter how bright, can outshine the source of all fire. The ring was light, just white gold, blinding, all-encompassing. For a moment, the entire stadium was illuminated from within, every shadow erased, every face lit up, as if the sun had descended into the arena. When it faded, Izuku was standing where he'd always been. Todoroki was on one knee, spent, steaming, both sides exhausted. He looked up at Izuku, and he smiled. Small, tired, real. "Thank you," Todoroki said. Izuku extended his hand again. This time, Todoroki took it. Izuku pulled him to his feet. "Todoroki is unable to continue." Midnight announced. "Midoriya advances to the final." The crowd was on its feet, not just cheering, crying. Half the stadium was openly weeping, and they didn't even fully understand why. Something about the light, something about the fire, something about two boys in a ring, one who burned too hot and one who'd been cold too long. Izuku won the sports festival. The final match was against Bakugo, and it was explosive in every sense of the word. Bakugo came in with the full force of his fury and his talent, detonating everything he had, his biggest blasts, his fastest movement, his best combat instincts, and he was good. Genuinely, undeniably good. The best fighter in the class by technical skill, but Izuku was the sun. Bakugo's explosions were fire, and fire couldn't burn in a field of absolute heat. His biggest blast, an attack that would have leveled a building, detonated against Izuku's aura and dissipated like a candle in a furnace. Izuku ended it with a concentrated pulse of heat that superheated the air around Bakugo's hands, detonating his nitroglycerin sweat prematurely, disarming him of his own quirk for a critical 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, Izuku closed the distance and pushed Bakugo out of bounds with an open palm to the chest. Clean, decisive, respectful. Bakugo hit the ground outside the ring, staring up at the sky, chest heaving, palms still smoking. Bakugo is out of bounds. Izuku Midoriya wins the UA Sports Festival. The crowd went nuclear. Izuku stood in the ring, looking mildly uncomfortable with the attention, and gave the smallest, most reluctant wave in the history of competitive sports. Bakugo lay on the ground for a long time, not from physical damage, from the weight of understanding. He'd given everything he had, held nothing back, fought at his absolute limit, and it hadn't been close. He covered his eyes with his forearm. And behind that arm, invisible to the cameras and the crowd, Katsuki Bakugo did something he hadn't done since he was 4 years old, standing on a playground. He reconsidered. The weeks after the sports festival were a blur of internships and patrols. Izuku was offered positions at every major hero agency in Japan, Endeavor's agency, Best Jeanist, Hawks. He turned them all down. Instead, he accepted an internship with a small, nameless underground hero in Hosu City who specialized in nighttime patrols and minimal resource combat. Because Izuku knew his weakness, in the dark, away from the sun, running on reserves, he wasn't unbeatable. He was powerful, yes. His stored energy was enough to level a city block even at midnight. But it was finite, and a hero couldn't choose to only work when the sun was shining. So he trained in the dark, in basements, in underground tunnels, in windowless rooms. He learned to conserve, to economize, to do more with less. He learned to fight without his quirk, hand-to-hand combat, defensive techniques, grappling. He'd always been physically strong, but now he refined it, made it lethal. He trained like someone who expected to face the worst-case scenario, because in his analytical mind, the worst-case scenario was the only one worth preparing for. And then Hosu burned. It was night, late. The city skyline was punctuated by flames. Not natural ones, but the work of the hero killer's latest rampage. Nomu had been released into the streets as a distraction. Multiple heroes were engaged. Chaos reigned. Izuku was on patrol with his internship mentor when he received the alert. Not the official one, a location ping from a classmate's phone sent in desperation. Tenya Ida. Izuku's blood went cold. Not metaphorically. His temperature actually dropped slightly, his body redistributing stored thermal energy from ambient output to combat reserves. A response he'd trained into himself. Cold skin, hot core. Ready, he ran. Through the burning streets of Hosu, through the rain that had started to fall. Cold, heavy rain that drummed against his skin and sapped his ambient heat. Through the night, away from any source of solar energy, into the worst-case scenario he'd been training for. He found the alley. Narrow. Dark. Brick walls on both sides. No sky visible, no stars, no moon breaking through the clouds. Rain falling in sheets. The only light came from a distant street lamp that flickered like a dying heartbeat. 3 figures, Ida, on the ground, prone. A deep cut along his arm, blood mixing with rain. His eyes were open, but his body was locked in place, rigid, paralyzed. He'd been cut, and the blood had been licked. Native, the pro hero that the hero killer had targeted, also on the ground. Also paralyzed, also bleeding, and standing over them, sword-drawn, bandages wet with rain and blood, was the man himself, Stain. The hero killer. He was tall, lean, built like a blade, all angles and edges, no wasted mass. His costume was dark, practical, stained with the evidence of his convictions. His eyes, visible through a gap in his bandages, were narrow and intense, burning with a zealot's certainty. He held his katana at his side, blood dripping from its edge. Ida's blood. He'd tasted it. Ida was paralyzed, and now Stain was raising the blade for the killing stroke, ready to deliver his judgment on another hero he deemed unworthy. "You chose this path for revenge," Stain said to Ida, his voice low and graveled. "Not for justice, not for others, for yourself. That makes you no different from the false heroes I've already cut down." Ida couldn't move, could barely speak through the paralysis, but his eyes were screaming. The sword rose and stopped because someone was standing at the mouth of the alley, silent, still, watching. Stain felt it before he saw it. A change in the air. The rain that fell between them, between the mouth of the alley and where Stain stood, began to steam. Tiny wisps of vapor rising from the droplets as they passed through an invisible curtain of heat. Stain turned his head. Izuku Midoriya stood in the rain. No glow, no dramatic aura. His reserves were low. The night, the clouds, the rain, the enclosed alley had stripped him of every advantage his quirk was designed to exploit. He had maybe 15 minutes of combat-level output left. Maybe less. But he was here. And his eyes. Those green eyes that had stared down Bakugo at age 4, that had burned through a Nomu, that had made Shigaraki flee, that had broken Todoroki's cage, were locked on Stain with the calm, absolute focus of a predator that had already decided the outcome. Stain assessed him in a second. Small frame, no visible weapon, wet clothes, no obvious quirk activation. "A child," Stain said. "Another student from UA? Here to play hero?" Izuku didn't answer. He was cataloging. Sword, katana, full tang, well-maintained. Stain's stance, low, weight-centered, right foot forward, a sword-drawing posture. His grip, traditional, two-handed, but his left ring finger was slightly off the suka, suggesting an old injury or adaptation. His breathing, controlled, 4-second intervals, exhale on cuts. His eyes, constantly tracking but biased toward the upper body. He expected attacks from the chest up. All of this in the time it took Stain to finish his sentence. Izuku stepped into the alley. Stain moved first. He was fast. Hero killer fast. The kind of speed that had ended a dozen pro heroes. The katana came down in a diagonal slash aimed at Izuku's left shoulder, a cut designed to open the carotid artery and end the fight in one stroke. Izuku swayed to the right. The blade missed by less than an inch. He felt the wind of it on his neck. Close. Deliberately close. He'd calculated the exact minimum distance needed to avoid the edge, and then he counterattacked. His remaining solar energy concentrated in his forearms, dense, white-hot, not a beam or a blast, but a solid coating of superheated plasma that wrapped around his hands and wrists like gauntlets forged in a star. The temperature was obscene. The rain that fell on his arms exploded into steam on contact. The light from the plasma lit up the alley in harsh, flickering white gold, casting wild shadows on the brick walls. He parried the return stroke. His plasma-coated forearm met Stain's katana, and the sound was something between a hiss and a scream. The sword's steel, meeting temperatures that exceeded its melting point, warped and softened on contact. The blade didn't break, it bent. The cutting edge deformed, turning from a weapon into a useless strip of glowing metal. Stain's eyes widened. He pulled back, but the damage was done. His katana, his primary weapon, the instrument of his judgment, was ruined. What? Izuku pressed forward. Close range. Inside Stain's guard. He knew the hero killer's fighting style was built around the sword and the blood lick. Maintain distance, cut, taste, paralyze, kill. Take away the sword and Stain was halved. Take away the distance and he was quartered. Stain drew a combat knife with his left hand. Fast. Adaptive. The hero killer hadn't survived this long by relying on one weapon. Izuku caught the knife thrust on his plasma-coated forearm. The blade lasted slightly longer than the katana, smaller, denser steel, but the result was the same. The metal glowed, softened, and curled away from Izuku's arm like a flower petal in a furnace. Two weapons. Both neutralized. In under 4 seconds, Stain disengaged, leaped backward, putting distance between them. His eyes were different now. The zealot's certainty was still there, but it was layered with something new. You have no conviction, Stain hissed, testing, probing for an emotional weakness. You fight without passion, without a cause. You're just another... My conviction isn't a loud voice or a grand speech, hero killer. Izuku's voice was quiet, steady. It cut through the sound of the rain like a warm knife through cold butter. It's found in the warmth of a life saved. Stain stared at him, and for the first time in a very long career of killing and judging, the hero killer Stain saw something in a young hero's eyes that gave him pause. Not anger, not fear, not the desperate, performative courage of a student playing at heroism. Conviction. Real conviction. The quiet, unshakable kind that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Stain drew his last weapon, a shorter blade hidden in his boot. He attacked again, faster this time, a flurry of cuts aimed at Izuku's hands and face, trying to draw blood, trying to get the lick that would end the fight. Izuku read every move. He'd been watching Stain for 30 seconds. That was more than enough. He knew the timing of the attacks, the rhythm of the footwork, the tells in the shoulders that telegraphed each cut. Stain was skilled, deadly, the most dangerous combatant Izuku had ever faced, but Izuku didn't need to be faster. He needed to be smarter. He let the last knife swing wide. A deliberate opening, a gap in his guard that was too tempting for a knife fighter to resist. Stain took it. Lunged forward, blade aimed at Izuku's exposed left side. And Izuku pivoted. His right hand, still coated in white-hot plasma, came around in a tight arc, not aimed at the blade, but at Stain's wrist. He didn't grab it. He just passed his hand within 2 inches of Stain's skin. The heat alone was enough. Stain's hand spasmed as the nerves in his wrist fired involuntarily from the thermal proximity, and the knife clattered to the ground. Izuku's left palm hit Stain in the sternum. Not a punch. A palm strike. The kind of thing you see in old martial arts, a short, efficient, full-body transfer of force delivered through the heel of the hand. Except this palm strike was backed by concentrated thermal energy that discharged on contact, a burst of heat that penetrated through clothing, skin, and muscle to shock the solar plexus and every nerve cluster in the chest cavity. Stain went rigid. His eyes bulged. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His body locked up. Not from paralysis, not from his own quirk, but from the sheer neurological overload of having his nervous system flash heated from the inside. He fell. Hit the wet alley ground face first. Didn't get up. Izuku stood over him, the plasma coating on his arms flickering and dying as the last of his reserves depleted. The glow faded. The heat diminished. The rain, no longer evaporating on contact, began to soak through his clothes, cold and real and grounding. He was exhausted. Empty. His internal reserves were at zero, the first time in his life he'd fully drained himself. His hands trembled slightly, his vision blurred at the edges, but he was standing, and the hero killer was not. Izuku turned to Ida. The paralysis was fading. Stain's quirk had a time limit based on blood type, and Ida's was apparently on the shorter end. The class representative was struggling to sit up, his injured arm pressed to his chest, his face a wreck of pain and guilt, and something that looked an awful lot like shame. Midoriya? Ida's voice cracked. I came here for revenge, for my brother. Stain was right. I wasn't being a hero. I was. Ida? The taller boy looked up. Izuku's face was exhausted, drained, but his eyes, those green eyes, now dark without the golden flecks, human and tired and real, were steady. You made a mistake. You're going to learn from it, and tomorrow you're going to be better. Simple, direct, true. Ida stared at him. Then his composure broke, and tears mixed with the rain on his face. I'm sorry, he whispered. Tell Native, he's the one who almost died. Harsh? Maybe. But Izuku didn't believe in comforting people with lies. He believed in treating them with enough respect to tell them the truth. He pulled Ida to his feet, checked on Native, alive, recovering, grateful. He zip-tied Stain's unconscious body with restraints from Native's utility belt and propped the hero killer against the alley wall. Then he sat down, just sat, on the wet ground, in the rain, leaning against the brick wall of the alley. His body was done. His reserves were empty. He had nothing left. No fire, no heat, no light. He was just a boy, tired, cold, human, but alive. And so were Ida and Native. The rain fell. The distant sounds of the Hosu crisis filtered through the alley. Sirens, explosions, the faraway shouts of heroes doing their jobs. Inside this narrow space, it was quiet. Izuku's body still glowed. Not the blazing solar aura of his power, that was gone. This was different. Residual warmth deep in his core, radiating outward from his skin in a soft, barely visible luminescence. The glow of embers after the fire has burned down. The glow of a hearth in a house that's been loved. Warm, steady, quiet. Ida looked at him through tear-blurred eyes. Native, propped against the opposite wall, stared with the expression of a man who had just watched something extraordinary and didn't have the words for it. Neither said anything. They didn't need to. In the darkness of a Hosu City alley, in the rain, in the dead of night, with no sun and no sky and no source of light anywhere, Izuku Midoriya glowed, not because of his quirk, because of who he was. 3 hours later, the crisis was over. The police had secured the area. The pro-heroes had contained the Nomu. The fires were out. Stain was in custody, unconscious, restrained, bound for Tartarus. Izuku was in a hospital bed, not from injuries, from exhaustion. His body had depleted its solar reserves completely for the first time in his life, and Recovery Girl had lectured him for 20 straight minutes about the biological risks of running a solar-powered quirk to absolute zero. He listened politely, nodded, said yes ma'am at appropriate intervals, and fell asleep the moment she left the room. He slept for 14 hours. When he woke up, the sun was streaming through the hospital window. His skin drank it in. He could feel his reserves refilling, slow and warm, like blood returning to a sleeping limb. By the time Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki showed up at his door, all three trying to look casual and all three clearly having rushed there the moment visiting hours opened, he was sitting up in bed, color back in his face, reading a book. Midoriya. Ida entered first, because Ida always entered first when there was a social obligation to fulfill. He bowed deeply, painfully, given his bandaged arm. I owe you a debt that I cannot. Ida, sit down before you pop your stitches. Ida sat. Uraraka was next. She didn't say anything. She just walked up to the side of his bed, looked at him with an expression that was trying very hard to be casual concern, and was actually barely contained emotional overwhelm, and flicked him on the forehead. Ow. That's for scaring me. Her voice wobbled. They said you fought the hero killer alone, at night, in the rain, with almost no power left. What were you thinking? I was thinking that Ida was going to die if I didn't. And what about you? What if I didn't. But what if you had? Then someone else would have had to step in, but I was there. So I went. Uraraka stared at him. Her eyes were shining. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then, you are the most frustrating, reckless, impossibly stubborn person I have ever met, and I am so glad you're okay. She sat down in the chair next to his bed and didn't move for the rest of the visit. Todoroki leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He didn't come in right away. He just watched. Izuku met his eyes across the room. You look terrible, Todoroki said. You should see the other guy. The faintest smile. I heard. One palm strike. Efficient. I was tired. Todoroki's smile widened by approximately 1 millimeter. For him, that was a belly laugh. He came into the room, took the remaining chair, and the four of them sat there in the morning sunlight. Ida straight-backed and solemn, Uraraka hovering and fussing, Todoroki quiet and present, and Izuku in the center, warm and alive and surrounded by people who cared about him. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't sought it. He was an introvert who preferred books to people, silence to conversation, solitude to company. But somehow, without trying, without performing, without ever being anything other than exactly who he was, Izuku Midoriya had found his people, and they had found their son. The news broke that evening. Stain's capture. The details were classified. Ida, Native, and Izuku were credited as a team to avoid the legal complications of unlicensed quirk use, but the truth leaked, as truth always does. The hero killer, who had terrorized Japan for months, who had killed or crippled 17 pro-heroes, who was considered the most dangerous villain since All for One, had been brought down by a 15-year-old UA first year in an alley, at night. In the rain, with no sun, the internet imploded for the second time. The green sun did it again. This kid fought a Nomu and the hero killer, and he's not even done with his first year. Bro Stain had a katana and Midoriya just melted it. Just melted the man's sword. What do you even do after that? Endeavor has been the #2 hero for 20 years, and this kid is already more impressive than him. I'm sorry I don't make the rules. When Midoriya runs out of sun power, he literally just beats you up with martial arts and tactical genius. This is the most broken character in the history of real life. The green sun has risen. Izuku saw the trending hashtags from his hospital bed, sighed deeply, and turned off his phone. Some things, not even the sun could burn away. Outside the hospital, the city of Hosu was rebuilding. The fires were out, the streets were clearing, the world was turning, as it always did, toward whatever came next. And somewhere in the ruins, in the quiet spaces between the noise and the wreckage and the endless churn of hero society, a legend was taking shape. Not a loud legend, not a flashy one. Not the kind that came with a grin and a catchphrase and a flex for the cameras. A quiet legend, a warm one. The legend of a boy who was born with a sun inside his chest and chose every single day to use it not as a weapon but as a light. Who fought not for glory or recognition, but because someone, somewhere, was cold and afraid and needed warmth. Who spoke rarely but meant everything he said. Who sat in silence and read people's souls. Who loved deeply, fought precisely, and burned with the steady, unquenchable fire of someone who had decided long ago what he was for. The legend of Izuku Midoriya. The Green Sun. The legend of Izuku Midoriya. The Green Sun. But legends don't get to rest, not in a world like this one. Not when the ink is still wet and the story is still being written by a boy who would rather be reading someone else's. Izuku was discharged from the Hosu City Hospital on a Tuesday morning. He walked out the front doors into sunlight, so bright it felt like an apology from the sky itself. Sorry for the clouds, sorry for the rain, sorry for making you fight the most dangerous killer in Japan on an empty tank. His skin drank it in. Every cell in his body hummed with the quiet satisfaction of a machine plugged back into its power source. By the time he reached the train station, his reserves were already at 40% and climbing. He didn't go home. He went to the beach. Dagobah Municipal Beach, a long stretch of sand on the coast of Musatafu that had once been a dumping ground for old appliances and scrap metal, cleaned up years ago by some community initiative. Now it was just sand and water and sky. And at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, it was empty. Izuku sat on the sand, face tilted toward the sun, and charged. Not trained, not planned. Just sat there, absorbing, filling up, feeling the warmth sink into his bones like water into dry earth. He sat there for 3 hours. When his phone buzzed with a message from his mother asking if he was okay, he replied, "Yes, watching the ocean. Home for dinner." When it buzzed again with 17 messages from a group chat that Uraraka had apparently added him to without his consent, titled Class 1A minus Minetta's dignity, he read exactly none of them and put the phone back in his pocket. He thought about the alley, not the fight. The fight was data, stored, analyzed, filed away. He'd already identified 14 things he could have done better, 6 moments where his energy expenditure was inefficient, and 3 points where a slightly different angle would have ended the confrontation faster. That was just process. No, he thought about the moment after. The sitting. The rain on his skin. The emptiness in his reserves and the fullness of something else, something that didn't have a unit of measurement or a place in his notebooks. The feeling of Ida's hand gripping his arm as he pulled him to his feet. The sound of natives breathing, alive, ragged, grateful. He thought about what it meant to be empty and still warm. He didn't reach a conclusion. Some thoughts aren't meant to be concluded. They're meant to be carried. He went home. He ate dinner with his mother. He slept for 12 hours. And the next morning, he went back to UA. The call came on his second day back. Not a summons. Not a formal notice delivered through Aizawa or the administrative office. A single handwritten note on cream-colored paper slipped into his shoe locker between his outdoor shoes and his indoor slippers, written in handwriting so precise it looked printed. Mr. Midoriya, tea at 3 p.m. My office. Izuku looked at the note, turned it over, looked at it again. Then he folded it neatly, put it in his pocket, and went to class. At 2:58 p.m., he knocked on the door of the principal's office. Come in. Nezu's office was exactly what you'd expect from the most intelligent being in Japan, who also happened to be 3 feet tall and covered in white fur. Books everywhere, not decoratively shelved but actively used, with bookmarks and sticky notes and dog-eared pages. A desk that was slightly too large for its occupant, surrounded by screens showing data feeds from across the campus. And at the center of it all, Nezu himself, sitting in an oversized chair with a cup of tea in his paws and a smile that managed to be simultaneously warm and deeply, deeply calculating. Midoriya, sit. Tea? Thank you, sir. Izuku sat, accepted the cup, noted the temperature, precisely 70 degrees Celsius, the optimal brewing temperature for the type of green tea Nezu was serving. The principal had done his research. Of course he had. They sat in silence for a moment, both of them comfortable with it, which was rare. Most people filled silence with noise because the quiet made them nervous. Nezu and Izuku were not most people. Nezu spoke first. I trust your recovery is complete? Physically, yes. My reserves are back to full capacity. And otherwise, Izuku paused, considered the question, recognized it for what it was, not small talk, not a wellness check, but a genuine inquiry from someone capable of understanding the answer. I learned something in Hosu, Izuku said, about operating at zero, about what's left when the power is gone. And what is left? Me. Nezu's smile widened by a fraction. He took a sip of tea, set the cup down with both paws, and then he looked at Izuku with those sharp, dark eyes, and the warmth in them didn't fade, but something else joined it, something serious. I'm going to be direct with you, Midoriya, because I suspect you prefer it, and because I respect you enough to skip the preamble. I do prefer it. Good, then here it is. Nezu leaned forward slightly. You are, by any measurable standard, the most powerful student UA has ever enrolled. Possibly the most powerful student any hero academy in the world has ever enrolled. Your entrance exam score is a record that will likely stand for decades. Your performance at the USJ was frankly the kind of thing that makes government defense committees rewrite their contingency plans. Your defeat of the hero killer, at night, depleted, alone, was an achievement that most professional heroes with decades of experience could not replicate. He let that sit. Izuku didn't react. He was listening. And you are 15 years old, Nezu continued, which means the world's going to want things from you. It is going to want you to be a symbol, a weapon, a deterrent, a brand. The Hero Commission is already asking questions. Agencies are already positioning. Media outlets have already built narratives around you that you did not consent to and cannot control. He paused, took another sip. The Green Sun. Catchy, isn't it? Someone else's name for someone else's idea of who you are. Izuku's jaw tightened. Barely. A millimeter. Here is my question, Midoriya. And I ask it not as your principal, but as someone who has watched brilliant people be consumed by the machinery of public expectation. Nezu's eyes were steady. The world is going to demand things from you that you never asked to give. The question is whether you decide what those things are, or whether the world decides for you. The office was quiet. The hum of the campus, the distant sounds of students and training, and the endless energy of UA, all muffled behind the thick walls. In here, it was just two minds in a room, and the space between them felt like a chessboard, where both players could see every piece. Izuku held the tea in his hands. Warm. Not from his quirk, just warm. He looked at the surface of the liquid, watching the faint swirl of dissolved leaves, and thought. He thought about the trending hashtag, the leaked USJ footage, the news coverage of Hosu, the way strangers looked at him now, in the hallways, on the train, in the street, with an expression that was half awe and half something hungrier. The feeling of being consumed, not by fire, but by attention. He thought about his mother, watching the news, seeing her son's name in headlines she never asked for. He thought about Uraraka saying, "Maybe the world needs to see you." And he thought about that alley, the rain, the darkness, the moment when all the light was gone and the only thing left was a boy who chose to stand up anyway. "I'll decide," Izuku said. Quiet, certain. "What I give and who I give it to, that's mine." Nezu looked at him for a long moment, and then the principal of UA High School, the smartest mind on the planet, a creature who had survived laboratories and cruelty and a world that didn't know what to make of him, smiled. Not the calculating smile, not the professional smile, but something real and warm and maybe a little sad. "Good," Nezu said. "Hold on to that. You'll need it more than any quirk." He refilled Izuku's tea. They talked for another hour, about thermodynamics, about hero law reform, about a book on quantum field theory that they'd both read and both had criticisms of. It was the most Izuku had talked to anyone in months, and he didn't hate it. When he left, Nezu sat alone in his office for a while, watching the door Izuku had closed behind him. "Remarkable," he said to the empty room. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Cancel the meeting with the Hero Commission regarding student Midoriya. He is not available for assessment." "Because I said so." "Yes. Good day." He hung up and went back to his tea. Summer came fast. UA's summer training camp was an annual tradition, an intensive boot camp designed to push the Hero Corps students beyond their classroom limits and into the real, messy, exhausting work of becoming heroes. Location changed every year. This year, the destination had been chosen with unusual specificity: Mount Aso, the volcanic highlands of Kumamoto Prefecture, a plateau of geothermal vents and obsidian fields sitting at altitude under a sky so clear and wide it felt like standing on the roof of the world. The air was thin, hot, and dry. The sun was relentless, closer, sharper, stronger at altitude than at sea level. Ultraviolet radiation was measurably elevated. The ground itself radiated residual volcanic heat. For most of Class 1A, it was going to be brutal. For Izuku, it was paradise. The Pussycats, the wild Pussycats, the mountain rescue hero team responsible for running the camp, met them at the base of the Highland Trail with their usual chaotic enthusiasm. Pixie Bob, Mandalay, Ragdoll, and Tiger, each of them professional, powerful, and apparently incapable of doing anything without making it an event. "Welcome, little heroes." Mandalay's telepathic voice rang in everyone's heads simultaneously, causing at least 6 students to flinch. "You'll be hiking to the camp from here. 3 hours uphill through active terrain. And just to keep things interesting, the local wildlife has been feeling frisky lately." Translation: there were training obstacles disguised as natural hazards. Fake landslides, triggered geysers, probably at least one very real and very annoyed mountain goat. The class set off. Within 40 minutes, they were spread across the mountainside, clustered in groups, struggling against terrain and heat and altitude. Kirishima was hardening his way through a rockfall. Kaminari had accidentally short-circuited a geyser and was sitting in a puddle of warm sulfur water looking confused. Bakugo was blasting his way up the steepest path available, refusing help, refusing to slow down, refusing to acknowledge that the altitude was making his lungs burn. Izuku walked. The sun hit the volcanic plateau like a spotlight on an empty stage, and Izuku absorbed it with every step. His skin took on that faint golden luminescence that his classmates had learned to recognize, the subtle glow that said his reserves were climbing into territory that most of them preferred not to think about. The air around him shimmered. Pebbles near his feet occasionally cracked from thermal stress, and his pace never changed. Steady, unhurried. A warm engine cruising at idle speed, he reached the camp before anyone else. By 20 minutes, Pixie Bob stared at him from behind her visor. "You aren't even sweating." "The heat doesn't bother me." "No kidding." She glanced at the thermometer mounted on the camp's supply shed. It's 38 degrees Celsius up here, and you look like you're on a Sunday stroll. Izuku looked around. Open sky. Clear horizon in every direction. Volcanic rock underfoot, still warm from geological processes millions of years in the making. No buildings to block the sun. No clouds. No shade. This is a good location, he said. The closest thing to excitement his voice had produced in weeks. The camp began in earnest the next morning. Aizawa ran it like a military operation. 5 a.m. wake-up, conditioning drills, quirk development exercises, combat simulations, rescue scenarios, tactical planning sessions, and then, when everyone thought the day was over, nighttime exercises. Your quirks are your tools, Aizawa told them on the first morning, his sleeping bag draped over his shoulders like a cape of disillusionment. But tools are useless without refinement. You're here to push past your current limits. Every single one of you will walk out of this camp stronger than you walked in, or you will walk out understanding exactly why you're not ready. For most students, the camp was transformative. Todoroki practiced combining his ice and fire simultaneously, creating controlled thermal cycles that made him exponentially more versatile. Uraraka worked on her weight limit, pushing her nausea threshold higher each day. Ida refined his recipro system, training to use it in shorter, more explosive bursts. Kirishima hardened and hardened again until his skin could take impacts that would crack concrete. Bakugo trained like a man possessed. He was always the first one on the training ground after Izuku. Always just behind, always pushing harder, louder, angrier, as if volume and fury could close a gap that was measured in stellar temperatures. He developed new techniques, concentrated his explosions into tighter, more focused blasts, worked on his aerial combat, using his detonations for precise three-dimensional movement. He was, objectively, becoming extraordinary. He never once looked at Izuku during training. He never once stopped being aware of exactly where Izuku was. And Izuku trained differently from everyone else because Izuku's problem was not the same as everyone else's. His classmates needed to get stronger. Izuku needed to get more precise. At full power, under open sky at volcanic altitude, Izuku Midoriya's thermal output was terrifying. The Pussycats measured it on the second day. They set up industrial-grade thermal sensors at various distances from Izuku while he performed a controlled, full-output exercise. At 10 meters, the temperature exceeded 2,000 degrees Celsius. At 20 meters, it was still over 800. At 50 meters, the ambient temperature was elevated by 23 degrees. Tiger, the physically strongest of the Pussycats, watched the readings and said nothing for a solid minute. "That's a natural disaster," he finally managed. "That's a first-year student," Pixie Bob corrected, equally stunned. But raw output wasn't the point. Izuku didn't need more power. He needed finer control. He spent hours practicing thermal gradients, maintaining different temperatures in different parts of his body simultaneously. Left hand at 200 degrees, right hand at room temperature. Core at maximum. Skin at ambient. The ability to hold a child with one hand while melting steel with the other. He practiced long-range precision. From the edge of a cliff, targeting rocks at distances of 500, 700, 1,000 meters. Single beams, pencil thin. Not melting the rock, but heating it to a specific temperature. Exactly 300 degrees, exactly 500 degrees, exactly 1,000, 1,200 degrees. Control, calibration. The difference between a weapon and a tool. He practiced stealth. Suppressing his thermal signature completely, reducing his ambient output to below detection levels. Making himself invisible to infrared sensors, to heat-seeking systems, to the natural heat awareness that most animals and some quirk users possessed. Becoming cold, becoming dark, becoming nothing, until he chose not to be. The other students watched him when they thought he wasn't looking. He was always looking. Something else happened at the camp, something quieter, something that Izuku didn't plan or intend. He made the people around him better, not through speeches or advice or dramatic interventions, through presence, through the simple act of being there, being excellent, being quietly, relentlessly committed to improvement in a way that was impossible to ignore. Todoroki trained harder because Izuku's fire made his look like a birthday candle. Not out of competition, out of aspiration. He started combining his elements in ways he'd never attempted, creating thermal shock attacks that used ice and fire in rapid alternation. He did this because he'd watched Izuku modulate his temperature from freezing to solar in a fraction of a second, and he thought, I can do something like that. My way. With my power. Uraraka pushed her nausea limit further because she'd seen Izuku fight on empty in Hosu, and if he could operate at 0, she could operate at her maximum. She started incorporating tactical thinking into her combat style, not just floating things, but floating specific things at specific times for specific reasons. She'd watched Izuku dismantle problems with efficiency, and she wanted to be that sharp. Kirishima's hardening got harder, Kaminari's electrical control got more precise, Jiro's earphone jacks got more sensitive. Tokoyami pushed Dark Shadow's limits further into the light, inspired by the idea that weakness could be overcome, even Bakugo. Especially Bakugo, because Bakugo hated Izuku the way a mountain hates the sky. Not really hate, but an all-consuming awareness of something vast and unreachable above him. And that awareness drove him. Not toward destruction, not anymore. Toward refinement. Toward becoming something worthy of standing on that mountain's peak. Aizawa noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. You're a catalyst, he told Izuku during a late-night check-in, when the camp was quiet and the stars were out and the volcanic plateau glowed faintly with geothermal heat. You walk into a room and the standard raises, not because you demand it, because you embody it. I'm just training, Sensei. Exactly, and they see a boy who has more power than any of them will ever have, and instead of coasting, he's out here at midnight practicing the difference between 300 and 301 degrees. That's a message, whether you mean it to be or not. Izuku thought about that. Is that a good thing? Aizawa was quiet for a moment, the stars reflected in his tired eyes. Ask me again in 10 years. The nighttime attack came on the 5th night. It was a clear night. The stars over Mount Aso were extraordinary. Thick bands of the Milky Way visible in ways that city light never allowed. Most of Class 1A was asleep in the camp barracks, exhausted from 5 days of Aizawa's relentless training schedule. The pussycats were in their quarters. The perimeter alarms were set. Izuku was awake. He was always awake at night, at least partially. It was a habit he'd developed over years of solo training. A state of light rest where his body recovered but his senses stayed alert, monitoring the thermal landscape around him the way a submarine monitors sonar. He could feel the body heat of every person in the camp, the residual warmth of the volcanic rock, the cool flow of nighttime air currents moving down the mountain. At 2:17 a.m., he felt something wrong. 3 new heat signatures. No, 4. Approaching the camp from the north, moving in a pattern that was not natural, too evenly spaced, too deliberately timed. Professional movement, military or paramilitary, and their body temperatures were elevated, adrenaline, exertion, anticipation. Izuku opened his eyes. He was off his bunk in 2 seconds, out of the barracks in 5. Barefoot on warm volcanic rock, wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, hair messy, eyes sharp, no glow, no heat signature. He'd suppressed his thermal output to 0, invisible in the infrared spectrum, indistinguishable from the ground beneath him. He moved toward the intruders like a shadow. Silent. Cold. Everything he'd practiced at camp, applied in real time. The first one was crouched behind a rock formation 50 meters from the barracks. Male. Large build. A mutation quirk. Scales covering his forearms and face, lizard-like. He held a spray canister in one hand. Gas-based. Knockout agent, probably. The plan was clear. Gas the barracks, incapacitate the students, do whatever they came to do while everyone was unconscious, Izuku assessed. 1 of 4. Spread out. Coordinated. Probably communicating via earpieces. If he took this one down loudly, the others would scatter or accelerate. He needed to be quiet. He circled behind the lizard-scaled man, staying downwind, suppressing every trace of his presence. 3 meters. 2 meters. 1. He placed his palm flat against the back of the man's neck. Not hot. Not burning. Just warm. Specifically, precisely warm. A targeted thermal pulse delivered directly to the base of the skull, heating the blood flowing to the brain by exactly 4 degrees Celsius. Enough to cause immediate vasodilation, a spike in intracranial pressure, and instantaneous unconsciousness. The biological equivalent of flipping a light switch. The man went limp. His body dropped to the ground with a soft thud. The canister rolled away. Izuku caught it before it clinked against a rock. Set it down gently. Zip-tied the man's wrists with a cord he'd taken from the supply shed on his way out. 1 down. 3 to go. The second was further out, positioned near the camp's water supply. Female. Thin. Her quirk was auditory. Izuku could feel the vibrations she was emitting at a subsonic frequency, probably a disorientation or sleep-deepening effect designed to keep the students under while the gas worked. Clever, he approached from above. The volcanic terrain was full of elevated rock formations, and Izuku scaled one without sound, crouching at the top, looking down at the woman 15 feet below. Same technique. He dropped, landed behind her with the soft impact of a trained body on soft ground, and placed his warm palm against her turnipple. Thermal pulse. Vasodilation. Vasodilation. Unconsciousness. She collapsed mid-hum, and the subsonic vibration died with her consciousness. 2 down. The third was the dangerous one. He was inside the camp's perimeter, moving between the barracks buildings with the fluid, confident motion of someone who had done this many times. His quirk was apparent from the way he moved, some kind of enhanced agility, the ability to shift direction instantly like a cat. He carried a blade, short, practical. He wasn't here just to incapacitate. Izuku intercepted him between the supply shed and the boys' barracks. The agile man sensed him a heartbeat before Izuku struck. Cat-like reflexes. He spun, blade flashing in starlight, and slashed at the space where Izuku's throat had been. Izuku wasn't there. He'd read the man's movement pattern in the half-second before engagement. Weight distribution, foot placement, the slight tension in the right shoulder that telegraphed a clockwise spin. He was already inside the arc of the blade, too close for the weapon to be effective. Palm strike. Solar plexus. Warm. Not hot enough to burn, not cold enough to be gentle. A precise application of thermal energy to the nerve cluster behind the sternum, disrupting the vagus nerve, dropping blood pressure, inducing syncope. The man's eyes rolled back. He dropped. The blade clattered to the ground. Izuku caught it before it hit. Set it down, zip-tied the man's wrists, checked his pulse. Alive. Fine. 3 down. The fourth was the scout. She was 300 meters from camp, positioned on a ridgeline, watching through binoculars equipped with thermal imaging. She was the spotter, the coordinator. If she realized her team was down, she'd signal whoever had sent them. Izuku couldn't reach her quietly in time. 300 meters of open volcanic terrain, and she was looking right at the camp, but she was looking through thermal imaging, and Izuku's thermal signature was 0. He walked straight toward her across the open ground, barefoot on volcanic rock, t-shirt fluttering in the light mountain wind, completely invisible to her equipment. She scanned the camp, saw the heat signatures of sleeping students, didn't see the cold spot walking toward her in the dark. He was 20 meters away when she lowered the binoculars and frowned. Something was wrong. Her team should have checked in by now. She reached for her earpiece. Izuku's hand found the back of her neck. Warm, precise. Down she went, 4 for 4. 12 minutes. No alarms, no noise, no fire. Not a single student woken up. He restrained the fourth intruder, collected the binoculars and communication equipment, and walked back to camp. He made one call to the local police, giving coordinates and a concise summary. Then he sat on the steps of the barracks and waited for dawn. The sunrise over Mount Aso was spectacular. The sky turned from black to deep blue to gold, the light sweeping across the volcanic plateau like a wave, warm and inevitable. Izuku's skin caught the first rays, and he felt his reserves begin to fill again, the familiar hum of solar energy flowing into his cells. Students started waking up around 5:30. Stumbling out of barracks, yawning, stretching, complaining about Aizawa's training schedule. They found Izuku sitting on the steps, fully dressed now, reading a book, looking like he'd been there all night. He had been there all night. The police arrived at 6, 4 unconscious intruders, all restrained, all uninjured except for headaches they'd feel when they woke up. The pussycats were stunned. Aizawa was not. When? Aizawa asked Izuku, standing over the zip-tied scout while police loaded her into a transport vehicle. 2:17 a.m., 4 hostiles. Coordinated infiltration, gas and subsonic disruption combo. One was armed with a blade. You took all 4 alone. They were unconscious in 12 minutes, without waking anyone up. That was the goal. Aizawa stared at him, then he looked at the restrained villains, then back at Izuku. How? thermal pulse to the brainstem, controlled vasodilation causing rapid unconsciousness, non-lethal, minimal lasting effects. You developed that technique here at camp? I've been working on it for a while. Camp gave me the chance to refine it. Aizawa was quiet for a long moment. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the volcanic rock. Students were starting to gather, hearing the commotion, seeing the police vehicles. Next time, Aizawa said, wake me up. You needed the sleep, sensei. Aizawa's eyebrow twitched. For him, that was practically an emotional breakdown. He walked away without another word. But over the next week, he quietly restructured the camp's nighttime security protocols around techniques that Izuku had demonstrated were effective. He didn't credit Izuku publicly. He didn't need to. The class found out over breakfast. The reactions were predictable. He did what? Kirishima's cereal went everywhere. 4 villains? Alone? At night? While we were sleeping? I didn't even hear anything, Kaminari said, looking genuinely disturbed. I was in the bunk right next to the door. How did I not hear anything? Because Midoriya is apparently a ninja in addition to being a walking sun, Jiro said, earphone jacks twitching. Which is just great. Really fair. Uraraka looked at Izuku across the breakfast table with an expression that was equal parts impressed, furious, and something softer that she buried under the furious part. You could have been hurt, she said. I wasn't. You could have... Uraraka, I'm fine. Everyone's fine. That's the point. She stared at him. Then she put an extra rice ball on his plate without a word and went back to eating. The gesture was so small and so deliberate that it said more than any speech could have. Todoroki across the table watched the exchange with quiet interest. Then he looked at Izuku and gave the smallest nod, one professional acknowledging another. And Bakugo was at the far end of the table. He hadn't spoken during the entire conversation. He was eating his breakfast with mechanical precision, eyes fixed on his plate, jaw set. But here's the thing. Bakugo hadn't been asleep. He'd been awake at 2:17 a.m. too. Not from sensing the intruders. His quirk didn't work that way. He'd been awake because he was always awake, because his mind never stopped churning, because the gap between where he was and where he wanted to be kept him staring at the ceiling long after everyone else was unconscious. He'd heard Izuku leave the barracks. He'd gone to the window. And he'd watched. Not all of it. The darkness and distance made details impossible. But he'd seen enough. The silhouette moving between buildings. Silent, precise, efficient. The brief moments where a faint glow of warmth illuminated a palm pressed to someone's neck. The way each threat simply stopped, folded, ceased to be a problem. No explosions, no drama, no wasted energy. Clean. Bakugo had watched the whole thing from a window with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. And when Izuku sat down on the steps at the end to wait for dawn, Bakugo had gone back to his bunk and stared at the ceiling for another 2 hours. His expression, if you could have seen it in the dark, was not anger. It was not admiration. Bakugo was not built for admiration. It was not envy, not frustration, not any of the simple, loud emotions that people expected from Katsuki Bakugo. It was hunger. The deep, quiet, transformative kind. The kind that doesn't explode outward but burns inward, reshaping everything it touches. The look of a boy who had just watched perfection operate in silence and understood, for the first time, that being the loudest explosion in the room was not the same as being the most powerful force in it. He didn't say a word to anyone about what he'd seen, but the way he trained for the rest of camp changed. Quieter, more focused, more precise. Izuku noticed. He always noticed. He said nothing. The camp ended. The class went home stronger, harder, more capable. And 2 weeks later, the League of Villains made their move. It was a Tuesday. Because apparently Tuesdays were significant in the story of Izuku Midoriya. He'd been discharged from the hospital on a Tuesday, he'd sat on a beach on a Tuesday, and now, on a Tuesday, 4 highly specialized villains would try to kill him in broad daylight. The setting was a UA practical exam, an urban combat exercise held in Ground Gown Gamma, one of the school's outdoor training facilities. It was a mock cityscape, open to the sky, designed for large-scale combat simulations. The exam was scheduled for noon, not peak sun, peak power, and that was exactly what Shigaraki wanted. If we can't kill him at his strongest, Shigaraki had told the assembled league in a darkened room somewhere in the underworld, we deserve to lose. He was scratching his neck when he said it. but his voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that happens when someone has stopped being angry and started being methodical. The 4 villains were specialists, contracted, expensive, each one selected for a specific purpose. They had been given files on Izuku, everything the League had gathered from the USJ, Hosu, the sports festival, and intelligence sources within the hero community. Their names don't matter. What matters is what they were designed to do. The first was Void, a villain whose quirk generated absolute darkness, not shadow, not dimness, but a sphere of total light negation that could expand to cover a city block. Inside the sphere, no photon existed, no light, no visual reference. Complete sensory deprivation for anyone who relied on sight. The second was Siphon, a villain whose body absorbed thermal energy from his environment, heat, radiation, infrared, all of it. He was a walking endothermic reaction, capable of draining the warmth from a room in seconds. Designed specifically to counter fire-type and heat-type quirks by simply drinking them dry. The third was Null. Her quirk disrupted electromagnetic radiation within a 50-meter radius, scrambling wavelengths, destabilizing photon streams, turning directed energy into scattered noise. Solar beams, focused light, coherent thermal emissions, all of it would theoretically break apart in her field. The fourth was Titan. No exotic quirk. Just a body that was 9 feet tall, as dense as titanium, and fast. Genuinely, terrifyingly fast. A physical combatant engineered through quirk enhancement to be strong enough and quick enough to engage anyone who survived the other 3. Darkness, absorption, disruption, brute force. A complete anti-solar countermeasure package. They struck at 12:03 p.m. Izuku was in ground gamma with a squad of classmates, Uraraka, Tokoyami, and Shoji, running a coordinated urban rescue drill. The exercise involved locating victims, sensor-equipped dummies, hidden throughout the mock city, and extracting them under simulated time pressure. The first sign of trouble was the sky going dark, not clouds, not an eclipse. A sphere of absolute blackness materialized 300 meters above the training ground, expanding outward like an oil spill across the blue. Within 10 seconds, it had swallowed the sun, the sky, and every scrap of light over ground gamma. Total darkness. At noon, in an open training field, Izuku felt it immediately, the abrupt cutoff of solar input like someone yanking a power cord from a wall socket. His charging stopped. His reserves were at full. Noon, open sky, he'd been absorbing all morning, but the tap was closed. Something's wrong, Izuku said. His voice was calm, already assessing. Everyone, stay together. Tokoyami, this is your environment. Dark Shadow is eager, Tokoyami confirmed. In the darkness, his quirk was at maximum, the sentient shadow unfurling from his body like a living cloak, expanding in the absence of light. Shoji, ears. Shoji's duplicated ear organs fanned out, turning like satellite dishes. Movement, multiple sources, approaching from the north and east. Fast. Not students. How many? 4. Izuku's jaw set. Uraraka, get to the perimeter. Find Aizawa. Tell him we have hostiles in ground gamma. I'm not leaving you. Uraraka. His voice was quiet but absolute. Go. She hesitated for one heartbeat. Then she ran. Izuku turned north. Into the darkness. Into the fight. Void struck first. He didn't need to be close. His darkness was already deployed, a sphere of absolute blackness that covered the entire training ground. Inside it, he could see perfectly. Everyone else was blind. Everyone except Izuku, because Izuku didn't need light. Here's the thing about solar energy absorption. Izuku's quirk didn't just process visible light, it processed the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Infrared, ultraviolet, microwave, radio. His body was a sensor array tuned to every frequency the sun produced. And while Void's darkness eliminated visible photons, it couldn't eliminate heat. Couldn't eliminate the infrared signatures of 4 bodies moving through a mock city at combat speed. Izuku saw them. Not with his eyes, with his skin. Every surface of his body reading thermal data, constructing a 3-dimensional map of his environment based on heat differentials alone. He moved. Siphon came at him from the east, running through the dark streets, his quirk already active. A rolling wave of cold that preceded him like a bow wave, draining heat from the air, the ground, everything in his path. The temperature around him dropped 40 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on the mock buildings, metal contracted. The air itself felt thick and dead. Siphon was grinning. He could feel the heat ahead, enormous, dense, concentrated. The green sun, the biggest meal of his life. He opened his absorption field wide and charged, ready to drink Izuku dry. He reached Izuku. The absorption field contacted Izuku's thermal aura, and Sipin pulled. Heat flowed into him. Massive quantities. Solar-class thermal energy pouring from Izuku's body into Siphon's absorption matrix like water through a broken dam. Siphon gasped, not from pain, but from the sheer volume. It was like trying to drink from a fire hydrant. His quirk strained, expanded, tried to accommodate the flow. Izuku didn't resist. He let it happen, and he watched. "You absorb heat," Izuku said from the darkness. His voice was conversational, almost interesting quirk, strong. But there's a question you should have asked before taking this job. Siphon's skin was starting to glow. Literally glow. The absorbed thermal energy was filling his body faster than his quirk could process and disperse it. His internal temperature was climbing. Sweat poured down his face. His hands shook. What question? He gasped. What happens when you absorb more energy than your body can contain? Siphon's eyes went wide. Izuku pushed. Not a beam, not a blast. Just a directed flow, a conscious, sustained release of stored solar energy, channeled outward into the conduit that Siphon had foolishly opened, like forcing water backward through a drain. Siphon's absorption quirk couldn't close fast enough. It had been designed to pull, and now it was being fed, overwhelmed by an energy source that exceeded its capacity by orders of magnitude. Siphon screamed. His body was overloading, heat blistering from the inside out, his quirk desperately trying to vent the excess, steam pouring from his skin. He tried to run, tried to close his absorption field. Izuku let him close it. The flow stopped, and Siphon collapsed, unconscious, his body smoking, his quirk burned out from overload like a circuit breaker that tripped too late. Alive. But done. One down. Null came next. She appeared from behind a mock building, her EM disruption field already active. A shimmering dome of distorted air that surrounded her body, scrambling electromagnetic radiation into incoherent noise. Inside her field, solar beams would scatter, focused thermal emissions would break apart, coherent energy would become chaos. She was smart enough to stay at range, 50 meters, right at the edge of her disruption radius. She raised both hands and pushed the field outward, expanding it toward Izuku. Izuku felt it, a strange, staticky sensation as the EM disruption washed over him. His ability to form coherent beams flickered. The precise, pencil-thin thermal lances he favored would shatter in this field, dispersed into useless, scattered radiation. So he didn't use beams, he used heat. Raw, ambient, undirected heat. Not a beam, not a lance, not a coherent emission of any kind. Just temperature, a massive, omnidirectional spike in the thermal energy of the air around him. No electromagnetic coherence required. No photon stream to disrupt. Just molecules vibrating faster and faster and faster until the air itself became the weapon. The temperature in a 30-meter radius around Izuku jumped from ambient to 300 degrees Celsius in under 2 seconds. Null's disruption field did nothing. You can't disrupt temperature. You can't scramble molecular kinetic energy. It's not a beam. It's not a wave. It's just hot. Fundamentally, absolutely, inescapably hot. Null screamed and dropped her field, throwing her arms up to protect her face. The air burned her lungs. The mock building beside her started to warp. The ground under her feet softened. Izuku dialed it back the moment she dropped. The temperature plummeted to normal within seconds. Null was on the ground, gasping, her skin red and blistered but alive. Electromagnetic disruption, Izuku said, walking toward her through the heat shimmer, is designed to counter directed energy. But heat isn't directed, it's just everywhere. He placed a warm palm on her forehead. Thermal pulse, unconscious, 2 down, Void panicked. From somewhere in his darkness sphere, watching through his quirk's perfect dark vision, he just witnessed both his teammates dismantled in under a minute. The plan was falling apart. The darkness was supposed to weaken the Sunboy, cut off his charging, blind him, make him vulnerable. But the Sunboy wasn't blind, and he wasn't vulnerable. He was moving through absolute darkness like it wasn't there, his head turning to track heat signatures invisible to anyone else, his body radiating a faint golden glow that had nothing to do with absorbed sunlight and everything to do with stored reserves. Void made a decision. He collapsed the sphere. Not all of it, just a section, pulling the darkness inward, concentrating it around himself in a tight cocoon of absolute blackness. A personal shield. If the Sunboy couldn't see him, couldn't target him, but Izuku could feel him. The darkness blocked light but not heat, and Void's body was a 37-degree thermal signature in a sea of cooling air. He stood out like a bonfire in a snowfield. Izuku walked to him. Through the dark, calm, unhurried, Void heard footsteps, getting closer, closer. He couldn't see. His own darkness was too thick, too concentrated. He'd blinded himself trying to hide. A warm hand found his shoulder. "You can't hide from heat," Izuku said. Pulse. Down, 3 down, and then there was Titan. The big one came through a mock building. Not around it, through it. 9 feet of dense muscle and denser bone, moving at a speed that was genuinely alarming for something that large. The concrete wall exploded outward as Titan crashed through, sending debris flying, his massive fists already swinging. He was fast, really fast. The kind of fast that no amount of analysis could fully compensate for, because some things were just raw physical superiority. And Titan had been engineered for exactly this scenario. Get past the exotic quirk users, close the distance, and put the target down with overwhelming physical force. His first punch missed Izuku by inches. The wind of it ruffled Izuku's hair. His second punch clipped Izuku's shoulder, and even that glancing blow sent the green-haired boy skidding backward 5 meters. Shoes scraping trenches in the asphalt, Izuku caught himself. Assessed. His shoulder throbbed, not broken, but hit hard enough to bruise deeply. Titan was already closing the gap, fists raised, moving with that terrible speed. Izuku didn't try to match it. He heated the ground. Specifically, he heated the asphalt under Titan's feet to its melting point. The 9-foot villain's next step landed in what was suddenly hot tar, his foot sinking 6 inches into liquefied road surface. He stumbled. Recovered fast, impressive reflexes, but the momentary loss of balance was enough. Izuku's palm found Titan's kneecap. He didn't hit it. He heated it. The kneecap, like all bone, was made of calcium phosphate. Calcium phosphate becomes structurally weak at temperatures above 700 degrees Celsius. Izuku's palm delivered exactly that, a concentrated, localized pulse of thermal energy to a specific anatomical point. Titan's right knee buckled. Not shattered, weakened. The structural integrity of the bone compromised just enough that the leg couldn't support 9 feet of dense mass at speed. He went down on one knee, and Izuku was already behind him, palm on the back of his neck, but Titan was tough. Engineered tough. The thermal pulse that had dropped the others barely slowed him. He swung backward with one massive arm, caught Izuku across the chest, and sent him flying. Izuku hit a mock building hard enough to crack the wall. His vision went white for a moment. The impact rattled his brain, his lungs, his ribs. He tasted copper. Titan was up. Coming at him again, limping, but coming. 9 feet of engineered violence, with a compromised knee and a fury in his eyes that said he was going to finish this job if it killed him. Izuku stood up, wiped blood from his lip, felt his ribs protest, ignored them. He raised both hands. No beam, no lance, no dramatic construct. Just his palms facing outward, and a wall of heat so intense that the air between them and Titan became visible. A shimmering, distorting curtain of superheated atmosphere that warped the light passing through it. Titan hit the wall, not a physical barrier. There was nothing to impact, nothing to absorb. But the temperature inside that curtain exceeded 3,000 degrees Celsius. The air itself was plasma, and Titan, for all his engineered density and durability, was still biological. His skin blistered, his eyes watered, his lungs inhaling superheated air seized. He staggered, stopped, tried to push through. Izuku held the wall, steady, unmovable. The sweat on his face evaporated before it could form. His hands glowed white gold. The energy cost was enormous, his reserves dropping visibly, but the wall held. And Titan, 9 feet of raw power designed specifically to kill the green sun, stood at the edge of that thermal barrier and understood, with the simple clarity that comes right before consciousness fades, that he had been built to counter the wrong thing. He fell forward, into the wall, through it. And the heat caught him and his body shut down, not from injury, but from the absolute biological impossibility of functioning in an environment where the air was a star. And he hit the ground face first and didn't move. 4 down, the darkness sphere dissipated. Sunlight poured back into ground gamma like water filling a drained pool. Brilliant and warm and overwhelming. Izuku stood in the middle of a warped, melted, cracked mock city intersection with 4 unconscious villains around him and a split lip that was already starting to swell. His reserves were at 30%. The fight had cost him, but he was standing. He was always standing. The response was immediate. UA's security systems, which had been jammed by the League's support from outside the campus, came back online the moment Void's darkness sphere collapsed. Aizawa was on site in 4 minutes. Recovery Girl in 6. Police in 10. The 4 villains were restrained, treated, and transported to holding facilities within the hour. The footage, captured by Ground Gamma's internal cameras, which operated on hardened systems unaffected by EM disruption, was reviewed by the UA faculty that evening. Nezu watched the entire fight 3 times. Adaptive, he said. Every countermeasure they deployed, he addressed not by overpowering it, but by understanding it. The heat absorber overloaded by his own intake. The darkness operator blinded by his own concealment. The EM disruptor made irrelevant by non-coherent thermal output. The physical brute neutralized by environmental manipulation. He paused the footage on the frame of Izuku standing in the intersection, 4 villains down, sunlight pouring in from above. This is not a student who fights. This is a student who solves. The League built those 4 specifically to counter him, Aizawa said from his chair. His arm was in a sling, not from the current incident, still recovering from a training injury. Solar type countermeasures across the board, and he dismantled all 4 in under 4 minutes. 3 minutes and 47 seconds, Nezu corrected pleasantly. He took a hit from the big one. Split lip, possible rib bruise. First blood anyone has drawn on him since admission. Nezu's smile was complicated, which tells us 2 things. First, that Midoriya is not invincible, which is reassuring. Second, that making him bleed requires a team of 4 specialized assassins, which is less reassuring. In the distance, somewhere in the underworld, Tamura Shigaraki watched the feed on a handheld screen that he'd hacked from a League operative positioned near UA's perimeter. He saw the 4 villains fall, one by one. He saw the green sun standing in the wreckage, bleeding from the lip, glowing in the returning sunlight. He crushed the device in his hand. The plastic cracked. The screen went dark, shards bit into his palm. He didn't flinch. Interesting, he said to the empty room. And the way he said it made the words sound like a death sentence. 2 weeks after the Ground Gamma attack, Izuku received a message through official hero channels. Not from UA, not from the police. From the office of Enji Todoroki, the number 2 hero, Endeavor. The message was 3 lines. My office. Thursday, 2 p.m. Come alone. No please. No context. No explanation. Izuku stared at the message for a long time. Then he went. Endeavor's agency was located in a modern high-rise in downtown Musutafu, all glass and steel and angular architecture designed to project authority. The interior was hot, not warm, hot. The climate control was set high, presumably to accommodate Endeavor's fire-based physiology, and the staff moved through the building in lightweight fabrics, sweating slightly, accustomed to working in what amounted to a luxury sauna. Izuku, walking through the lobby, felt nothing. The heat was ambient noise to him. He was led to a conference room on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, afternoon sun streaming in. A long table with a single chair on each end. Endeavor was already there. Enji Todoroki in person was different from Enji Todoroki on television. On screen, he was the flame hero, commanding, powerful, wreathed in fire and purpose. In person, he was just large. Enormously, overwhelmingly large. 6'7", shoulders like a doorframe, a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who didn't believe in subtlety. His beard of flames was dimmed, low output, resting mode, but even at idle, the heat coming off him filled the room. He sat at one end of the table. Izuku sat at the other. Between them, 10 feet of polished wood and 2 decades of the number 2 hero's accumulated frustration. Endeavor studied him. The way a general studies an enemy position. Clinical, thorough, looking for weakness. Izuku let him look. He sat with his hands folded on the table, posture straight, face neutral, those green eyes steady and patient. Endeavor spoke first. Your quirk. Yes. Solar-based. Energy absorption, storage, and emission. Theoretical output ceiling unknown. Practical demonstrations suggest temperatures in excess of 10,000 degrees Celsius at peak output. That's approximately correct. At the sports festival, you created a construct that exceeded anything I've produced in 30 years of professional hero work. At the USJ, you incapacitated a bioweapon designed to kill All Might. In Hosu, you defeated the hero killer on depleted reserves using tactical combat and precision thermal application. Endeavor's voice was flat, reporting facts. You are 15 years old. Yes. Silence. Endeavor's flame beard flickered. The room was very warm. I have spent 20 years chasing the number one position, Endeavor said. I have trained my body to its absolute limit. I have pushed my quirk beyond what anyone thought possible. I have sacrificed... He stopped. The word had caught on something. He continued harder. I have sacrificed everything to surpass All Might, and I have failed. Izuku said nothing. He knew when to listen. And now there is you. Endeavor's eyes were sharp, intense, burning in the way that everything about him burned. A child, a first-year student, and the gap between what you can do and what I can do is already... He stopped again. His jaw worked. Tell me your goal, boy. The question hung in the air, between them, between two fire users, like between a man who had built his life on the pursuit of supremacy and a boy who had never once used the words number one. My goal, Izuku said, is to be warm. Endeavor blinked. To be a light people can find their way back to, Izuku continued. Same tone, quiet, direct, no performance, no awareness that anyone in the world would find this answer insufficient. Not a flame that burns everything in its path. The silence that followed lasted 8 seconds. Izuku counted. Endeavor's expression went through a series of changes so subtle and so rapid that most people would have missed them entirely. Izuku did not miss them. First, confusion, because the answer didn't compute. It didn't fit that the framework Endeavor had built his life around, the framework of rankings and power and being the best. Second, anger, brief, instinctive, the rage of a man who hears his life's obsession dismissed as unimportant. Third, something else, something deeper, something that moved across Endeavor's face like light through water, there and gone. Distorted, hard to name. It lived in the space around his eyes, in the slight softening of his jaw, in the way his hands resting on the table, unclenched by a fraction. It was recognition, the kind that hurts, the kind that comes when you see in someone else the thing you should have been and understand with terrible clarity that you chose differently. Endeavor looked at Izuku Midoriya. A 15-year-old boy with more power in his fingertip than Endeavor had in his entire body, who wanted nothing more than to be warm for other people. And for one brief, devastating moment, the number 2 hero saw the distance between who he was and who he could have been, and it was farther than any ranking. He didn't speak. Not for a long time. The flames of his beard flickered and dimmed and flickered again, unstable, like a man breathing through something difficult. Then he stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city. My son, he said, with his back to Izuku. Shoto. Is he... He trailed off. Couldn't finish the question. Couldn't find the right shape for it. Is he happy? Is he okay? Does he hate me? Has he found what I could never give him? He's finding his way, Izuku said. He's strong, getting stronger every day, and he's learning to use his fire. Endeavor's shoulders tightened. Relaxed, tightened again, because of you. It wasn't a question, Izuku answered it anyway. Because of himself, I just reminded him it was his. Endeavor stood at the window for a while longer. The afternoon sun caught his face, and for a moment, stripped of the posturing and the rage and the 30 years of burning ambition, Enji Todoroki just looked tired. Tired and old and achingly, obviously human. Thank you for coming, he said. Still facing the window, Izuku stood, nodded, even though Endeavor couldn't see it, and left. He found Todoroki waiting outside the building, leaning against a lamppost, arms crossed, that half-and-half face unreadable as always, but his mismatched eyes were fixed on the building's entrance with an intensity that said he'd been there for a while. You talked to him, Todoroki said. He asked me to come. What did he want? Izuku considered the question. I think he wanted to understand something that he's been too close to see. And does he? I don't know. Maybe. He's trying. Todoroki was quiet. His left side, the fire side, Endeavor's side, the side he'd spent years hating, flickered with a barely visible warmth. Not flames, just heat. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and old and complicated. I'm not ready to forgive him, Todoroki said. You don't have to be. But I... He stopped, looked away. The lamppost under his hand was developing frost on one side and condensation on the other. I don't want to be cold anymore. Izuku looked at him. And for a moment, the two of them stood on a busy street in Musutafu, surrounded by the noise and bustle of the city, and shared a silence that was more honest than any conversation. Then, don't be, Izuku said. Todoroki's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Almost. Close enough. They walked back to UA together. Todoroki talked more than usual, about his training, about a new technique he was developing, about a book his sister had recommended. Izuku listened. Really listened. And Todoroki, who had grown up in a house where no one listened to anything except the sound of their own ambition, felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't even known was tight. The provisional hero license exam was held 2 weeks later. The venue was Takoba National Stadium, a massive outdoor complex originally built for international athletic competitions, now repurposed for the exam. Open sky, full midday sun, an urban disaster simulation zone spread across several acres, complete with crumbling buildings, simulated fires, flooded zones, and sensor-equipped civilian dummies distributed throughout. The exam tested 3 things: combat effectiveness, rescue capability, and decision-making under pressure. Hundreds of students from hero academies across Japan competed simultaneously. Schools sent their best. Reputations were on the line. Izuku arrived in his UA gym uniform, hands in his pockets, hood up, looking exactly like someone who would rather be anywhere else. The sun hit his face the moment he stepped out of the transport bus, and his body sang. Other students noticed him. Of course they did. The green sun, the USJ clip, the sports festival. Stain, the ground gamma incident. By now, every aspiring hero in the country knew his name, his face, and at least 3 wildly exaggerated stories about what he could do. A group from Shiketsu High, the other top hero academy, rivals of UA, watched him from across the staging area. Their expressions ranged from wary to openly excited. One of them, a second-year, tall, lean, with close-cropped silver hair and quick eyes, broke away from his group and walked straight toward Izuku Midoriya. The silver-haired boy stopped 3 feet away. He had the build of a sprinter and the eyes of a tactician. His name badge read, Inasa Yoarashi. Wait, no, this was someone else. The badge read, Nagamasa Mora. But next to him, slightly behind, was a second boy, this one with sharp features and an almost military bearing. His badge read, Seiji Shishikura. But the one who spoke was neither of them. It was a girl who appeared from behind both of them, moving with a liquid grace that suggested her quirk was mobility-based. Short dark hair, calm face, athletic build. Her badge read Kami Utsushimi, but the way she moved was wrong. Too precise, too controlled. Hey, she said. Her voice was different from her appearance. Harder. I've been wanting to meet you. Izuku looked at her, assessed. Something off. He filed it away. Nice to meet you, he said. Neutral. The boy who actually stepped forward finally was Seiji Shishikura. He was looking at Izuku with an expression of controlled evaluation. We've studied your sports festival performance, impressive range and output, but I wonder, how do you perform when the terrain doesn't favor you? I perform. Shishikura blinked. Not the answer he'd expected. Then I look forward to the exam, he said stiffly. The exam began. The combat phase came first. Students from all schools were released into the urban simulation simultaneously, tasked with incapacitating opponents by tagging specific targets on their bodies. Chaos erupted immediately, quirks blazing, alliances forming and breaking, the mock city filling with the sounds of combat. Izuku moved through it like a warm wind. His thermal field passively deflected most ranged attacks. Projectiles that entered his ambient zone lost structural integrity, energy blasts dissipated, ice shattered. Students who got close enough to engage in melee found the air around him increasingly uncomfortable. Their movements sluggish as their bodies fought the rising temperature. He tagged opponents with casual precision. A warm fingertip on a target plate, and the plate's sensor registered the hit. No beams, no blasts, no spectacle. Just a quiet boy moving through a war zone, touching people gently, and ending their exam hopes with the lightest possible contact. In 90 seconds, he'd tagged 6 opponents, and then Shishikura found him. The Shiketsu second year was fast. His quirk, Meatball, the ability to reshape flesh he touched into compressed spheres, was devastating in close quarters. He'd already incapacitated 8 UA students. He was smart, tactical, and very motivated to prove that Shiketsu's best could match UA's rumored prodigy. He came at Izuku from a blind corner, hands outstretched, quirk active. His fingers brushed Izuku's forearm and recoiled. Izuku's skin was hot. Not burning hot, just enough that Shishikura's fingers flinched involuntarily before making full contact, before the quirk could activate. A fraction of a second, but enough. Izuku turned, faced him. Those green-gold eyes calm and assessing. Shishikura adjusted. Came again, faster this time, from a different angle, both hands reaching. Izuku stepped sideways. The movement was minimal, 6 inches to the left, but it was perfectly timed, perfectly angled, and it put him just outside the reach of both hands while positioning his own palm inches from Shishikura's chest. He tapped the target plate on Shishikura's uniform. Beep. Tagged. Eliminated. It took 90 seconds. From approach to elimination, 90 seconds. And Shishikura, one of Shiketsu's best, stood there staring at his blinking target plate with the expression of someone who had just realized that the gap between very good and generational was wider than he'd imagined. "You didn't even use your quirk," Shishikura said. "I used my quirk," Izuku said. "You just couldn't see it." The surface-level heat, the involuntary flinch, the fraction of a second that turned full contact into a near miss. That was the quirk, not the beams, not the constructs, not the dramatic displays. The quiet, invisible, always-on application of thermal control that made Izuku nearly impossible to touch in close combat. Shishikura stared at him. Then, slowly, he bowed. A formal, stiff, respectful bow that came from a place of genuine acknowledgement. "I see," he said. "Shiketsu has work to do." He walked away. The combat phase ended. Izuku had tagged 23 opponents. No one had tagged him. The rescue phase was different. The urban simulation shifted. New obstacles activated, fires erupted from controlled gas vents, flooding from water systems, structural collapses triggered by hydraulic mechanisms. Sensor-equipped civilian dummies were deployed throughout the zone, some visible, some hidden, all recording the response time and effectiveness of every student who found them. This was the phase where most combat-focused students faltered. Fighting was instinct. Rescue required observation, empathy, coordination, and the ability to prioritize. Izuku excelled, not through power, through perception. He moved through the disaster zone and he saw everything. A dummy trapped under rubble, the subtle dust pattern around the collapse site indicating the direction the structure had fallen, the load-bearing points that could be heated to controlled weakness for safe extraction. A dummy in a flooded zone, the water level, the current direction, the optimal path to reach it without destabilizing the surrounding structures. A dummy on a high floor of a crumbling building, the structural integrity assessment that told him he had 47 seconds before the floor gave way. He found victims before they were supposed to be found. The exam proctors had hidden several dummies in locations that were designed to be difficult, behind walls, under multiple layers of rubble, in areas that required specific quirk applications to access. Izuku found them by reading the thermal signatures. Bodies, even simulated ones, had heat profiles. The dummies were equipped with warming elements to simulate living humans, and Izuku could feel them through walls, through floors, through rubble. He cleared his zone 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Then he moved to adjacent zones and started clearing those too. The rescue portion had a unique scoring element, interpersonal effectiveness, how you communicated with victims, how you calmed them, how you prioritized their emotional state alongside their physical safety. This was scored by proctors hidden among the civilian actors mixed in with the dummies. Izuku approached every victim, real actor or dummy, with the same quiet, steady warmth. He spoke calmly. He moved deliberately. He radiated, both literally and figuratively, the kind of controlled, reliable presence that made scared people feel safe. One of the civilian actors, an older woman playing a trapped office worker, was supposed to be hysterical, screaming, panicking, making rescue difficult. When Izuku crouched beside her, placed one warm hand on her shoulder and said, "I'm here. You're going to be okay," the woman forgot she was acting for a solid 3 seconds. "Your hand," she said. "It's warm. I know, hold on to it." She did, and the proctors, watching from observation points, made notes in margins that usually stayed blank. The exam ended. Results were tabulated. Izuku Midoriya. Combat score maximum, rescue score maximum. Decision-making assessment maximum. The examiner, a retired pro hero named Yokumiru Mera, a man so perpetually exhausted he made Aizawa look energized, looked at the score sheet for a long time. Then he picked up a pen and wrote a single word in the evaluation box. Generational. He stamped the license approval, put down his pen, and went to take a nap. The provisional license was issued. Izuku looked at it, a small laminated card with his photo, his name, and the authorization to perform hero work under professional supervision, and felt nothing dramatic. No triumph, no excitement, just the quiet satisfaction of a tool acquiring the license to be used properly. But the reactions around him were less subdued. You cleared 3 zones. Kirishima was practically vibrating. 3 in 15 minutes. The suggested pace is 1 zone in 20 minutes. He found the hidden victims too, Uraraka added, sitting next to Izuku at the post-exam cafeteria. She'd passed 2. Strong scores across the board. The ones behind the walls, the proctors said those were supposed to take at least 10 minutes each to locate. Thermal signatures, Izuku said. They were warm. Yeah, and you walked right to them like you had a map. The Shiketsu students looked like they'd seen a ghost. Several of them came up to me afterward, Ida reported, adjusting his glasses. They wanted to know about your training regimen. I told them you were a very private person and they should respect that. Thank you, Ida. I may have also mentioned that you threw a ball into orbit during our first week, for context. Izuku looked at him. For context, Ida repeated, without a trace of irony. Despite himself, Izuku almost smiled. The overhaul arc, as the media would later call it, didn't begin with a briefing or an intelligence report. It began with a child. It was a Saturday. Late September. The leaves were turning, and the air had that first crisp hint of autumn that made everyone in Musutafu reach for a jacket. Izuku was walking home from the UA library. He'd been there since 6 a.m., researching advanced plasma physics, when he turned a corner and stopped. A girl. Small, maybe 6 or 7 years old. White hair that fell past her shoulders in unwashed tangles. A plain dress, too thin for the weather, torn at the hem. Bandages on her arms, both arms. Wrapped from wrist to shoulder, not neatly, not carefully, but desperately. The wrapping job of someone who was in pain and couldn't afford to be seen by a doctor. She was sitting on the curb of a quiet side street, knees drawn to her chest, shaking, not crying. Past crying. Shaking the way a body shakes when it's running on nothing but adrenaline and fear and the last fumes of a survival instinct that doesn't know what to do next. Izuku stopped 10 feet away. He didn't approach immediately. Didn't rush forward, didn't kneel down, didn't do any of the things that well-meaning adults did that made scared children more scared. He just stood there, present, visible, not threatening, and he let his warmth radiate, not much. Just a gentle expansion of his ambient thermal field, a soft wave of comfort that reached the girl like sunlight breaking through clouds. The air around her warmed by 5 degrees. The chill of the autumn winds softened. The girl felt it. Her shaking slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. She looked up, red eyes, terrified, but also searching, looking at him the way a drowning person looks at a piece of driftwood. Not hope, exactly, something more primal. The recognition of warmth in a cold, cold world. Izuku sat down, right there on the curb, 10 feet from her, cross-legged, hands in his lap, facing forward, not staring at her, not pressuring her, just sitting, being warm. He waited. 3 minutes. 5. 7. The girl watched him from the corner of her eye, still shaking, still curled tight, but the shaking was less now. The warmth was reaching her, physically and otherwise. At the 9-minute mark, she spoke. Are you a hero? Her voice was so small it barely existed. Like a candle flame in a draft, one wrong word and it would go out. I'm a student, Izuku said. Same quiet voice he always used, same steady calm. I'm training to be a hero. Silence, then. Can they protect people from anything? That's what we try to do. Another silence, longer this time. The autumn wind blew, leaves skittered across the pavement. Even from doctors, Izuku's expression didn't change, not a muscle. But the ambient temperature around him rose by 4 degrees, so subtly that only someone with thermal sensors could have detected it. Tell me about the doctor, he said. Gentle. No urgency, no alarm, just an open door. And Eri told him. Not all of it. Not at once. In fragments and whispers and half-sentences that broke off into silences where the words were too heavy to carry. She told him about the man with the bird mask. About the needles. About the room with no windows where she went when they needed more of her. About the pain. Constant, grinding, inescapable pain that she'd stopped thinking of as unusual because it was all she knew. She told him what her quirk did. Rewind. The ability to turn back the biological clock of any living thing she touched. And she told him what they made from it. From her blood, from her body, from the pieces of her that they took and took and took. A drug. A bullet. Something that could erase a person's quirk. She told him all of this while sitting on a curb in a quiet street in Musutafu, wrapped in the warmth of a boy who sat 10 feet away and listened without flinching, without interrupting, without looking away. When she finished, the street was quiet. The sun was lower now, the shadows longer, the light more golden. Izuku's hands resting in his lap were glowing, faintly, that soft golden luminescence that lived under his skin. Not power, not output, just warmth expressed involuntarily because his body processed emotion through heat, and right now every cell in him was burning with something that had no name but was as old as the first human who ever stood between a child and the thing hurting them. Eri, he said. Her name. She'd given it to him somewhere in the telling, whispered like a secret she wasn't sure she was allowed to share. She looked at him. You're safe now. 2 words that, from anyone else, would have been a platitude. A nice thing to say. An empty comfort from a stranger on a street corner. From Izuku Midoriya. They were a fact. A physical law. A promise backed by the gravitational certainty of someone who had the power of a star and the conviction of someone who knew, beyond any doubt, what that power was for. Eri looked at him. Those red eyes, huge and haunted and desperately, achingly hopeful, and something in her, something that had been crushed and broken and buried under years of pain, twitched, flickered. Like an ember in ash, she scooted 2 feet closer to him, then 2 more. Then she was next to him, sitting on the curb beside a boy who was warm in a way she'd never experienced, and she leaned just slightly, just a fraction, against his arm, his warmth wrapped around her like a blanket. Izuku didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there, warm and solid and present, and let a broken child feel safe for the first time in her life. They sat like that for a long time. What followed was precision. Izuku brought Eri to a safe location, a family services facility that AA used for child welfare cases, staffed by licensed caregivers and protected by hero-grade security. He stayed with her until she was settled, until she had a warm bed and a meal and someone kind watching over her. He gave her his number, wrote it on a piece of paper in his careful handwriting. "If you need anything," he said, "anytime." She held the paper like it was made of gold. Then he went to work. Aizawa first. A 30-minute conversation in Aizawa's office, door closed, voices low. Izuku laid out the situation with clinical precision. The Shihasaikai overhauls quirk erasing operation, the scope of what had been done to Eri, the probable location and layout of the underground compound based on details Eri had provided and cross-referenced with publicly available property records. Aizawa listened. His expression, normally flat, went through several phases that culminated in the coldest fury Izuku had ever seen on a human face. Nezu next. A longer conversation. Strategic. Nezu pulled up intelligence files, cross-referenced with law enforcement data, contacted the Hero Commission's Operations Division. Within 2 hours, the outline of a plan had formed. Within 48 hours, it was ready. The Shihasaikai compound was located in the Tama district of Tokyo, a sprawling traditional estate that concealed a network of underground laboratories and tunnels. The surface facility was well guarded. The underground levels were a maze. The conventional approach would have been a ground-level raid, a team of pro-heroes breaching the front entrance, fighting their way through layers of Haseikai enforcers, descending level by level into the compound. The Night Eye Agency had proposed exactly this. It would work. It would also take hours, risk dozens of lives, and give Overhaul ample time to destroy evidence, escape through back channels, or do worse things to the people still inside. Izuku proposed something different. "The compound is underground," he said, standing in front of a holographic map of the facility in UA's operations room. Present, Nezu, Aizawa, Sir Night Eye, Fat Gum, and a team of pro-heroes. Every level is beneath reinforced concrete and steel. They built it that way to be siege-proof, defensible from the ground up. He zoomed in on the roof of the main building, but not from the top down. A skylight. A single architectural feature, a large, ornate glass panel in the ceiling of the estate's traditional central hall, directly above a structural shaft that extended all the way down to the deepest level of the underground compound. Originally a ventilation system, now sealed with reinforced barriers at every level. At noon, Izuku said, under direct sunlight, I can breach those barriers from the top. Every level, simultaneously. A sustained thermal lance through the central shaft will compromise every seal, every lock, every reinforced barricade between the surface and the bottom level. The heat will flood the compound, not lethally, but oppressively. Every enforcer inside will have two choices: evacuate through the exits that our perimeter teams control, or stay in an environment that's rapidly becoming uninhabitable. He looked at the assembled heroes. Total time from breach to containment, under 8 minutes. The room was quiet. Sir Night-Eye, tall, thin, severe, the former sidekick of All Might, looked at the plan, looked at Izuku, looked at the plan again. You're proposing to use yourself as a siege weapon. I'm proposing to minimize casualties on both sides by removing the structural advantages that make a conventional raid costly. The heroes on the ground won't need to fight through layers of defense. They'll need to collect enforcers who've already surrendered. And Overhaul himself? I'll handle Overhaul. The way he said it left no room for debate. The operation launched 3 days later, Thursday. Noon, Izuku stood on the roof of the Hasaikai compound. The sun was directly overhead, mid-October, clear sky, solar intensity reduced from summer peak, but still enormous at his level of absorption. He'd been charging since dawn. Below him, the skylight panel, ornate, beautiful, centuries-old glass, glinted in the sunlight. Around the compound's perimeter, a coordinated team of pro-heroes waited at every exit. Fat Gum at the east entrance, Aizawa at the west, teams of police and hero support personnel at every access point. The compound was surrounded. Izuku looked at the sky, closed his eyes, felt the sun on his face. Then he opened his eyes and put his palm through the skylight. The glass vaporized on contact, not shattered, vaporized. His hand passed through it like it wasn't there, and a column of golden light followed, a sustained thermal lance that punched straight down through the central shaft of the compound. Level after level, barrier after barrier, reinforced concrete, steel plating, composite armor, all of it melting, sublimating, ceasing to exist as a continuous beam of solar-class energy bored through the compound like a hot needle through ice. The heat flooded inward. Every corridor, every room, every level of the underground complex was hit by a wave of thermal energy that raised the temperature to an unbearable degree. Not lethal. Izuku was precise even at this scale, but oppressive, suffocating. The kind of heat that makes every instinct in your body scream to get out. The Hasaikai enforcers ran. They poured from every exit like ants from a flooded mound, coughing, sweating, disoriented. The perimeter teams caught them, immobilized, restrained, collected. No fights, no resistance. You don't fight when you've just been baked out of your fortress by something that felt like standing inside the sun. 8 minutes. Compound cleared, except for one, Kai Chisaki. Overhaul. Did not run. He was in the deepest level. The one that Izuku's lance had breached last, the one where the most valuable materials and the most dangerous research were kept. He stood in a room that was half melted, walls warped, equipment dripping, the air shimmering with residual heat, and he waited. His mask was on, his gloves were on. His eyes, visible above the bird-like beak of his mask, were calm. The green sun, Overhaul said as Izuku descended through the breached shaft, dropping from level to level using controlled thermal pulses to slow his fall. I wondered when you'd come. Izuku landed on the floor of the lowest level. The concrete cracked under his feet. His body was glowing, full output, maximum charge, the combined energy of a morning of sunlight focused into 170 centimeters of human determination. Kai Chisaki, Izuku said. It's over. Is it? Overhaul removed his right glove. His bare hand was pale, clean, perfect. The hand that could disassemble any matter on contact and reassemble it in any configuration he chose. The hand that had taken a child apart and put her back together, over and over and over, to harvest the pieces of her that made his drug. You know what I can do, Overhaul said. One touch. I could take you apart at the molecular level, rearrange you into something unrecognizable. Your bones, your muscles, your organs, all raw material. No quirk in the world protects you from that. You need to touch me, Izuku said. I do. Then this should be simple. Izuku kept his distance. 8 meters, outside of arm's reach, outside of lunging distance, outside of any range that Overhaul could close before Izuku reacted. Overhaul moved. He was fast. Faster than he looked, augmented by reconstruction of his own body, his legs enhanced for explosive speed. He crossed 4 meters in a blink, hand outstretched, fingers reaching. Izuku's palm flared. A wall of heat, not a beam, not a construct, just a sudden, searing rise in temperature in the space between them, hit Overhaul at the 3-meter mark. The villain's skin blistered. His instinct overrode his intent, and his hand recoiled. Overhaul touched the floor instead. The concrete beneath Izuku's feet erupted, spikes of reconstructed stone sharp and fast, shooting upward like teeth from the earth. Izuku was already moving. He'd read the floor touch, anticipated the reconstruction, and jumped the moment Overhaul's palm contacted the ground. The spikes missed him by feet. He landed on a section of intact flooring and fired a beam. Thin, precise, aimed not at Overhaul, but at the floor around his feet, melting the concrete into a liquid pool that swallowed Overhaul's legs to the knee. Overhaul reconstructed the floor immediately, solidifying it, freeing himself, reshaping the ground into a ramp that launched him upward and forward. Hands reaching, always reaching, Izuku retreated, maintained the gap. Fired again, this time at the walls, melting the structural supports on one side of the room, causing a controlled partial collapse that forced Overhaul to divert his quirk to self-protection, reconstructing the falling debris around himself into a protective shell. And in that moment of diversion, Izuku closed the distance, not to touch, to heat. He stood 3 meters from Overhaul's reconstructed shell and raised his output to a level that turned the air between them into plasma. The shell, concrete, steel, whatever Overhaul had made it from, began to glow. Red, orange, white. The structural materials softened, warped, melted. Overhaul tried to reconstruct them faster, tried to maintain the shell's integrity, but you can't reconstruct something that's being continuously vaporized. The matter simply ceased to be solid long enough for his quirk to act on it. The shell collapsed. Overhaul stood in a puddle of molten material, his mask cracked from the heat, his eyes wide. He lunged one more time, desperate, fast, fingers reaching for Izuku's face. Izuku caught his wrist, not with his bare hand, with a hand wrapped in plasma so hot that the air around it was white gold. Overhaul's skin couldn't survive contact. His fingers, the tools of his quirk, the instruments of so much suffering, blistered and burned before they could make purposeful contact, before the neural signals could travel from brain to fingertip to activate the deconstruction. Pain. Overhaul screamed behind his mask. His quirk tried to deconstruct the hand holding him, but the thermal damage to his fingers disrupted the precise neural feedback required. You can't deconstruct what you can't properly touch. Izuku held him, didn't let go. The plasma coating on his hand was eating through the edges of his own skin. The output was beyond safe levels, even for him, and his palm was blistering under the strain. "You took a child apart," Izuku said. His voice was quiet, steady. The same voice from the playground, the same voice from the USJ, the same voice from Hosu. "You made a drug from her body. You used her pain as a production line." Overhaul stared at him through cracked mask lenses, wrist trapped, fingers useless, the most dangerous hands in the underworld neutralized by a boy who was burning himself to hold them still. "You're done," Izuku said. He released Overhaul's wrist and, in the same motion, delivered a thermal pulse to the villain's chest, strong enough to disrupt consciousness, precise enough to avoid permanent damage. Overhaul fell. The room was quiet, molten, glowing. The heat shimmer made everything look like a dream. Liquid walls, softened floors, the faint gold light of Izuku's skin casting long, warm shadows. Izuku looked at his palm. Red. Blistered. The worst burn he'd ever given himself. It would heal. Recovery Girl would see to that. He zip-tied Overhaul's hands, separately, individually, each finger restrained. He was not taking chances. Then he climbed back up through the shaft, emerging into daylight, carrying Overhaul's unconscious body over his shoulder, and delivered the villain to the perimeter team like a package. Total operation time, 11 minutes. Aizawa looked at Overhaul's restrained form, looked at Izuku's burned palm, looked at Izuku's face. "You burned yourself. The output was necessary. You could have used less and taken longer." Every additional minute gave him more chances to deconstruct the compound's structure and escape. Speed was the priority. Aizawa stared at him. Then, Go see Recovery Girl. After I do one thing. He walked to the police transport vehicle where the compound's records had been loaded. He found the research files, found the data on the quirk erasing bullets, found the documentation of what had been done to Eri. Clinical, detailed, obscene in its thoroughness. He read every page. His face showed nothing. The air around him showed everything. The temperature climbing, the officers nearby stepping back unconsciously, the transport vehicle's metal frame beginning to groan. Then he closed the file, handed it to the lead investigator, and said, "Make sure this never happens again." It wasn't a request. He went to see Eri. She was at the safe facility. When he walked in, his burned palm wrapped in a bandage, his clothes still dusty from the compound, she looked at him with those red eyes and said, "You came back. I promised." She looked at his bandaged hand. Her face crumpled. "You're hurt because of me." He crouched down. Eye level, his good hand found her shoulder, warm and steady. "I'm hurt because a bad man did bad things and someone had to stop him. That's not because of you. That's despite you. You didn't cause any of this. You survived all of it. And that makes you the bravest person I've ever met." Eri's lower lip trembled. Her eyes filled. And then she threw her arms around his neck and cried. Really cried, the deep, shaking, world-breaking sobs of a child who had finally found a place where it was safe to fall apart. Izuku held her. Wrapped his warmth around her like a cocoon, his injured hand throbbed. He didn't care. He held her until the sobs subsided, until the shaking stopped, until she was breathing again. Slow, hitching breaths, but breathing. "I'm warm," she whispered into his shoulder. "You're so warm." "I know. Is it okay if I stay warm?" He closed his eyes. For a moment, just a moment, the composure cracked. Not visibly, not in any way that anyone watching could see, but inside, in the place where Izuku Midoriya kept everything he felt, locked behind walls of discipline and control and years of solitary self-mastery, something broke open. Something raw and huge and fierce. "Always," he said. "You can stay warm for as long as you want." She held on tighter. Outside the facility, the sun was setting. Golden light poured through the windows, painting everything in shades of amber and warmth. A boy held a child in his arms, and the light wrapped around them both, and the world, for just this one moment, was exactly as warm as it should be. The world noticed, not slowly, not gradually, not through some measured progression of awareness. The world noticed all at once, the way a dam breaks, everything held back for months suddenly rushing forward in a torrent of attention, analysis, and argument. The Hasaikai operation made the front page of every major newspaper in Japan. Not just the hero press, mainstream media, financial news, political commentary. The scope of Overhaul's drug operation, the quirk erasing bullets, the systematic abuse of a child, it was a story that had everything the news cycle craved. A villain, a victim, and a hero who was already the most discussed name in the country. UA first year dismantles criminal empire in 11 minutes. The Green Sun, from student to phenomenon. Midoriya Izuku, is he the future of heroism? How a 16-year-old melted through a fortress and changed the underworld. Panel shows. Talk shows, analysis programs, every platform with a camera and an opinion weighed in. Former pros, retired heroes with decades of experience, appeared on television and argued about what the Hasaikai operation meant for the hero industry. "He didn't just beat Overhaul," said one retired hero, a woman who'd spent 30 years as a top 10 hero before hanging up her cape. "He made the entire compound irrelevant. The structural breach alone, boring through multiple levels of reinforced material from the surface, that's not a combat feat. That's a strategic capability. The kid turned a siege into a cleanup operation." "But is that heroism?" the host pressed, "or is it just overwhelming power?" "Watch the footage of him with the child," the retired hero said, her voice changing. "The one from the facility. He sits down next to her on a curb and just waits. He radiates warmth until she feels safe enough to talk. That's not power, that's character. And character at that level, combined with power at that level, I've never seen it. Not in 30 years. The hero rankings became a national conversation. Izuku was technically ineligible. He was still a student, not a licensed professional. But the rankings discussion happened anyway, because the world didn't care about technicalities when a 16-year-old was demonstrating capability that made the top 10 look modest. Endeavor, still the number 2 hero, watched the coverage from his agency. His flame beard burned at its usual intensity. His expression was unreadable. "Turn it off," he told his aide. The aide hesitated. On screen, footage was playing of Izuku emerging from the compound shaft, overhaul over his shoulder, sunlight catching his face. "Sir?" I said, "Turn it off." The screen went dark. Endeavor sat in silence for a long time, and something in his posture, the set of his shoulders, the angle of his jaw, shifted by a fraction. Not softer, not weaker, but different. The posture of a man who was beginning to understand that the mountain he'd been climbing all his life had a summit he'd never imagined. All Might saw the footage too. Toshinori Yagi, the former symbol of peace, now retired, diminished, living quietly in a small apartment near UA, sat in front of his television at 3 in the morning and watched the Hasaikai operation footage for the 4th time. He was thin, skeletal, almost. The body that had once been the most powerful in the world was a fragile shell now, sustained by medication and willpower. He coughed often. He moved slowly. He was, by any physical measure, a shadow of what he'd been. But his eyes, those deep blue eyes that had once inspired an entire nation just by looking at it, those eyes were alive. He watched Izuku breach the compound, watched him descend through the shaft, watched the fight with Overhaul, the distance control, the thermal manipulation, the precision that turned a potentially devastating confrontation into a 7-minute containment. He watched the footage of Izuku with Eri, the curb, the waiting, the warmth. And then All Might, alone in his apartment at 3 in the morning, smiled. Not his famous smile, the enormous, blinding, everything is going to be fine smile that had been the foundation of an era. This was smaller, older, more real. The smile of a man who had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders and now saw for the first time someone who could carry it differently. Not on their shoulders, in their hands, with warmth. "This is what I hoped for," he said to the empty room. His voice was rough, quiet. Not a successor, not another me, something entirely new. He didn't reach out to Izuku, didn't call, didn't visit, didn't insert himself into the young man's story. Because All Might understood something that few people in his position ever had the humility to grasp. This wasn't his chapter anymore. It was someone else's. And the best thing he could do, the most heroic thing, was to step aside and watch the sunrise. He turned off the television, went to bed, and for the first time in a very long time, Toshinori Yagi slept well. The League of Villains did not sleep well. In a hidden location, a bar, dingy, underground, the kind of place where the lighting was always wrong and the air always smelled like something dying, held an emergency meeting. The League held an emergency meeting. Shigaraki sat at the bar. His hands were on the counter. All 5 fingers, both hands, pressed flat against the wood. He wasn't wearing the hand over his face. It sat on the counter beside him, and without it, his face was visible, young, pale, scarred, the face of a boy who had been broken by the world and had decided to break it back. "Stain," he said. His voice was calm, flat, dead. He beat Stain in an alley at night with no power left, on empty. He lifted one finger from the counter. The wood beneath it didn't decay. He was controlling it. Barely. USJ. He beat the Nomu, cooked it from the inside. A weapon designed to kill All Might, and he put it down with his hands. Another finger lifted, set down again. The sports festival. He walked the obstacle race, threw a ball into orbit, broke Todoroki's chains, beat Bakugo like it was practice. His fingers drummed on the counter. Tap, tap, tap. Ground Gamma. We sent 4 specialists. 4. Anti-solar countermeasures across the board. He dismantled them in 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Tap, tap. Overhaul, the Hasaikai, a fortified underground compound with 100 enforcers and the most dangerous deconstructionist in the underworld. He melted through it from the roof. 11 minutes. Silence. He's 16 years old. Kurogiri, standing behind the bar, said nothing. Dabi, leaning against the wall, watched with hooded eyes. Toga, sitting cross-legged on a booth, twirled a knife between her fingers. Twice, spinner, compress, all present, all quiet. Every plan we've made, Shigaraki continued, every strategy, every weapon, every counter, he's beaten them all. Not with brute force, not because he's just stronger, because he sees everything, because he thinks faster than we move, because he's so far ahead of us that by the time we execute, he's already adapted. He picked up the hand from the counter, looked at it. The severed fingers of a long-dead stranger, preserved and mounted, the symbol of everything that had been taken from Tamura Shigaraki and everything he intended to take back. He put it back on his face. "So we stopped planning," he said. "We stopped strategizing. We stopped sending others." His red eyes, visible through the gaps between the fingers, burned. "I'll go myself." It happened on a Wednesday, the last day of October, autumn in full force, the campus of UA High School dressed in red and gold, the trees along the main path dropping leaves that crunched under students' feet. Izuku was on the roof. It was afternoon. Post-lunch. The sun was past its zenith, but still strong, 2 or 3 o'clock, the kind of soft golden light that photographers chase and poets write about. He was sitting on the roof of the main building, legs stretched out, back against an air conditioning unit that was warm from the sun, reading. The book was about stellar formation. How stars are born from clouds of gas and dust, how gravity pulls the particles together, how the pressure builds and builds until something ignites and the light begins. He liked reading about stars. It helped him understand himself. He felt the warp gate before he saw it, a shift in the air, a wrongness, the thermal equivalent of a discordant note in a song. The temperature behind him changed, not cooling or heating, but displacing. Something was arriving that hadn't been there a moment ago. He closed his book. "You're bold," he said. "Coming here." The purple-black mist swirled behind him and solidified into a gate. Through it stepped Tamura Shigaraki. He was different, taller, somehow. Or maybe it was the posture, straighter, more deliberate, the twitchy instability replaced by something colder, more contained. He was wearing a long black coat over his usual outfit, and his hands, those 5-fingered instruments of entropy, hung at his sides, gloveless, pale, patient. The hand was on his face. Those red eyes peered through it. "Bold?" Shigaraki repeated. Maybe, but I'm done being careful. Careful gets your people melted in 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Izuku stood, turned, faced him. They were 10 feet apart. 2 boys, because that's what they were, despite everything. Just 2 boys, barely past childhood, standing on a rooftop in the afternoon sun. "You shouldn't be here," Izuku said. "Quiet, not afraid, just stating facts." "No," Shigaraki agreed, "but I am, and I'm going to show you something before we do this." He held up his right hand, 5 fingers spread, and the air around his hand turned gray, not dark, not shadowy, gray, the color of decay, of entropy, of everything that falls apart and returns to dust. It spread from his fingertips like frost on glass, except it wasn't cold. It was nothing. The absence of coherence. The undoing of structure at a molecular level. The air conditioning unit behind Izuku, the one he'd been leaning against, crumbled. Just crumbled, without Shigaraki touching it. The decay spread through the air, through the molecules themselves, turning solid metal and plastic and circuitry into fine gray dust that collapsed in on itself and blew away in the breeze. Izuku watched. Assessed. "Range," he said. "Impressive, right?" Shigaraki's voice was soft, almost gentle. "I found something in the Nomu research. Sensei's old work, a way to amplify what I have. I don't need to touch anymore, Green Sun, I just need to want it." He swept his hand in a slow arc. Across the rooftop, a swath of surface material, concrete, rebar, waterproofing membrane, decayed into nothing. A trench of gray dust carved across the roof, 10 meters long, a foot deep, range decay. City-level potential. The ability to unmake matter without physical contact. Izuku's analytical mind ran the numbers, the range, the speed of propagation, the energy cost, because every quirk had one. Shigaraki's breathing had changed after the display, slightly faster, slightly strained. The amplification was powerful, but it cost him. Good. Finite resources. Exploitable. "You came to kill me," Izuku said. "Not a question. I came to prove something. To myself, to the world, to you." Shigaraki's red eyes burned through the hand on his face. "If I can't beat you at your strongest, in the sun, at full power at your peak, then everything I believe is a lie, and I don't think it's a lie." "It is," Shigaraki laughed. That small, cracked sound from the USJ. "Older now, harder. Let's find out." He attacked. The decay wave came first, a horizontal pulse of molecular destruction that swept across the rooftop like a gray tide. Everything in its path dissolved. Concrete. Metal. Air itself seemed to lose its coherence, the molecules shuddering apart. Izuku jumped. Straight up. Not a leap. A thermal launch. Superheated air beneath his feet creating an explosive pressure differential that rocketed him 20 meters into the air. The decay wave passed beneath him, consuming the section of roof where he'd been standing. He hung in the sky for a moment, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. His body began to glow, the golden luminescence rising from his skin, intensifying, filling the air with warmth and light. This was it. No holding back. He came down, not fell, descended. A controlled thermal dive, his body wrapped in solar fire, trailing golden light like a comet. He hit the ground at the edge of the rooftop, and the concrete vaporized under his impact, a crater of molten stone spreading from the landing point. Shigaraki met him. Decay against fire. Entropy against energy. One hand swept forward, a focused wave of molecular destruction aimed at Izuku's chest. Izuku's thermal field caught it. The decay wave hit superheated air so energized that its molecules were vibrating too fast, too powerfully for the decay to gain purchase. You can't unmake something that's moving at thousands of degrees of kinetic energy. The decay faltered, stuttered, broke apart against the thermal barrier like a wave breaking on a seawall. Shigaraki's eyes widened. He pushed harder. Both hands now a double wave of amplified decay pouring everything into it. Izuku walked forward, into the decay, through it. His thermal field expanded with every step, the temperature climbing, the air around him becoming plasma. The decay waves hit his aura and dissolved, not neutralized but outpaced, overwhelmed. The energy of a star burning faster than entropy could unmake it. "Your quirk decays matter," Izuku said, walking forward, glowing, the air singing around him. "It breaks molecular bonds, reduces structure to dust. It's powerful, maybe the most destructive quirk I've ever seen." Shigaraki was backing up now, for the first time since he'd arrived. The decay was failing. Each wave was weaker than the last as Izuku's heat overwhelmed the molecular disruption. "But here's the thing about entropy," Izuku continued. "It's the natural state of the universe. Everything decays, everything falls apart eventually. That's physics." He raised his hand. Golden light pooled in his palm. "And here's the thing about stars. They exist in defiance of entropy. They take scattered matter and compress it, heat it, fuse it into something new. They are the universe's answer to decay, light from darkness, order from chaos, energy from nothing." The light in his palm intensified. Brighter. Hotter. The rooftop around them was coming apart, half from Shigaraki's decay, half from Izuku's heat, and the two of them stood in the middle of the destruction like figures in a painting, one gray and crumbling and the other gold and incandescent. "You want to prove that everything falls apart," Izuku said. "I'm here to prove that it doesn't have to." Shigaraki screamed, not with words, just a raw, tearing animal sound. The sound of someone who had built their entire existence on the certainty that the world was rotten and now faced a boy who burned that certainty to ash just by standing there. He threw everything he had, every ounce of amplified decay, every fragment of stolen power, every bit of rage and pain and broken childhood fury, into one massive wave of molecular destruction that tore across the rooftop toward Izuku like a tsunami of gray death. Izuku met it. He opened his hands, both of them, palm up. And from those palms rose the largest solar construct he had ever created. Not a sphere, not a beam, not a lance or a shield or any shape that could be named. It was light, just light. Pure, golden, cascading light that rose from his palms and filled the sky. A cascade of solar fire that fell like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, like dawn after the longest night, like every warm thing the world had ever known compressed into a single, staggering, transcendent moment of radiance. It fell. Down from the sky, down through the gray, down through the decay, down through everything that Shigaraki represented. The rot, the entropy, the conviction that the world deserved to crumble. The golden cascade met the gray wave in the space between the two boys, and for one eternal heartbeat, they were balanced. Destruction and creation, entropy and energy, cold and warm. Then the light won, not violently, not explosively, not with the catastrophic force of a bomb or the shattering impact of a collision. The light won the way the sun wins every morning, gradually, inevitably, unstoppably. The golden cascade expanded, pushed through the gray, burned it clean. The decay wave weakened, thinned, broke apart. The gray retreated, the light advanced, and Izuku drove the cascade down, not into Shigaraki, between them, into the rooftop, into the ground, creating a barrier of pure solar plasma that blazed like a wall of golden fire from the broken concrete to the empty sky. A line drawn in light, a boundary made of stars. On one side, Izuku, glowing, standing. Warm on the other side, Shigaraki, on his knees, spent. The amplified decay exhausted, his body trembling with the biological cost of pushing a stolen power past its limits. His hands, those terrible, powerful hands, were at his sides, fingers curled, palms up, empty. The barrier burned between them. Golden. Absolute. Impassable. Izuku looked at Shigaraki through the flames. Those green eyes, gold-flecked, steady, the same eyes that had stared down a bully at age 4 and never looked away, met red ones that were wet and wide and broken in a way that had nothing to do with physical damage. "It's over," Izuku said. Shigaraki stared at him, through the fire, through the light, through everything. He whispered, "Why won't you just kill me?" "Because that's not what light does." Shigaraki's face crumbled. The hand on his face, the preserved fingers of a stranger, the symbol of his pain, fell away. It hit the ground and Shigaraki didn't pick it up. He knelt there, bare-faced, young, scarred, and for the first time since Izuku had known of his existence, Tamura Shigaraki looked like what he was, a lost boy, cold, afraid, waiting for someone to find him. Izuku couldn't be that person. He knew that. Some warmth comes too late, and some cages are too deep, and some people are too far gone to be reached by a hand no matter how warm it is. But he could end it without cruelty. Without vengeance, without becoming the thing he fought against. The plasma barrier held. Pro-heroes arrived within minutes. The alarm had been triggered the moment Kurogiri's warp gate appeared on campus. Aizawa was there first, capture scarf ready, erasure active. Behind him, a response team. Behind them, police. Shigaraki didn't resist. He knelt behind the barrier, staring at the light, and when the heroes came around it and restrained him, he went quietly. His eyes never left Izuku. Not with hatred, not with rage, with something that might, in a different life, in a kinder world, have been understanding. They took him away. The barrier faded. The golden light dimmed. The rooftop, what was left of it, steamed and smoked and creaked as warped materials cooled and contracted. Izuku stood alone on the broken roof. His glow was fading. His reserves were depleted. Not to zero, not like Hosu, but low. His hands were shaking slightly. The sustained output had pushed him further than ever before. He sat down, cross-legged, on the broken concrete in the fading afternoon sun, and he breathed. The city stretched out below him. Musutafu, his city, the place where he'd been born, where he'd grown up, where he'd learned to control the fire in his chest and the quiet in his soul. It was intact, undamaged. The fight had been contained to the rooftop because Izuku had contained it. Not a single window broken below, not a single civilian threatened, not a single life disrupted beyond the footage that would play on the news tonight and be discussed and debated and analyzed and memed into oblivion. He'd won. Not with a killing blow, not with a final attack. With a line of light that said, "This far and no further." With the decision to contain instead of destroy. With the choice that defined who he was. Not the fire, but the warmth. Not the weapon, but the light. He sat there until the sun touched the horizon. Then he stood, brushed the concrete dust off his pants, and went to find Recovery Girl. His hand was shaking. His reserves were low. He was exhausted and sore and hungry. But he was warm. He was always warm. The weeks after were loud. Louder than the USJ. Louder than Hosu. Louder than anything. Shigaraki's arrest, the attempted attack on UA's campus, the footage from the rooftop, all of it crashed through the media like a typhoon. The conversation about Izuku Midoriya went from, is he the future, to he's already here. He turned off his phone for 3 days. He visited Eri. She was doing better. She'd been placed with a foster family approved by UA's child welfare program, and she was learning to smile. Not the reflexive, frightened smiles of a child trying to seem normal, but real ones. Small. Hesitant. Growing, Izuku came to visit. She ran to the door. Actually ran. And she hugged him and his warmth wrapped around her and she said, "You're here. I'm here. Will you read to me?" He read to her. A children's book about a firefly who was afraid of the dark. He did the voices. Badly. Eri laughed. The sound was like hearing a language that had been dead for 1,000 years, spoken aloud for the first time. Izuku looked at her. This small, fierce, unbreakable child, and thought about Nezu's words. The world is going to demand things from you. The question is whether you decide what those things are. He decided this. This was what the fire was for. He checked on his classmates. Not because they asked, because he cared in his quiet, understated actions over words way. Ida had graduated from his injury, both physical and moral. He was training with renewed purpose, his movements sharper, his judgment clearer. The shame from Hosu had been alchemized into resolve. He bowed to Izuku every time they met, 90 degrees, formal, sincere, and Izuku had stopped telling him to stop because it was clearly something Ida needed to do. Todoroki was using his fire freely now. Both sides, in balance, the war inside him settling into something more like a conversation. He'd visited his mother in the hospital. He didn't tell Izuku about it, but Izuku noticed the change, the way Todoroki's shoulders sat lower, the way his voice was half a shade warmer. Uraraka was stronger, in every way. Her combat skills had sharpened, her rescue instincts had deepened, and she had developed a quiet, steady confidence that made her classmates gravitate toward her. She still talked too much around Izuku. He still listened, and the thing between them, the warmth that was more than quirk-related, the gravitational pull that had nothing to do with her zero gravity, remained unspoken, because some things don't need words to exist. They just need time. And warmth, Bakugo had not spoken to Izuku since the sports festival, had not acknowledged him directly, had not looked at him during class or training or any of the dozen daily interactions that their shared classroom forced upon them. But one evening, after the Shigaraki incident, as the class was leaving for the day, Bakugo fell into step beside Izuku in the hallway. Not next to him. Behind him by half a step. Walking in the same direction, at the same pace, in silence. They walked like that for 2 minutes, through the hallway, down the stairs toward the front gate. Then Bakugo spoke. The rooftop. Izuku glanced back. You could have killed him. Yes. You didn't. No. Bakugo was quiet for 10 steps. Then, I would have. Izuku stopped, turned, looked at Bakugo, really looked, the way he looked at everything, with that patient, bottomless focus that saw things others missed. Bakugo met his gaze. Red eyes. Fierce. Proud. But honest. More honest than Izuku had ever seen them. That's why you're better than me, Bakugo said. The words came out like they'd been pulled from him with pliers, like they'd been trapped in his chest for 10 years and had finally broken free. His jaw was tight. His fists were clenched. His entire body radiated the tension of a boy forcing himself to say the hardest thing he'd ever said. Izuku looked at him. No, Izuku said. That's why we're different. Better is a ranking, and I don't believe in rankings. Something passed through Bakugo's expression, something swift and complicated and old. His jaw worked. His eyes burned. Then he walked past Izuku, shoulder to shoulder, and out the front gate without looking back. But his hands, at his sides, had unclenched, and the tiny, involuntary sparks that had popped from his palms for as long as anyone could remember, the constant, reflexive detonations of a boy who was always ready to explode, were still, for the first time in Katsuki Bakugo's life, his hands were quiet. The next morning, Izuku was on the roof again. A different section. The old rooftop was being repaired. Half-melted concrete and warped rebar replaced by UA's tireless maintenance team. He'd found a spot on the east wing, a flat section with a clear view of the horizon, where the sunrise would hit first. He was sitting cross-legged, still. The morning was cold. Late October, the last warmth of autumn fading, the air carrying the first sharp bite of winter. His breath misted faintly. The sky was gray, pre-dawn, that colorless, quiet moment before the world remembered it was supposed to be bright. He could hear his friends, not literally. They were inside, in the classroom, in the hallway below, at their voices muffled by walls and distance. But he could feel them, their body heat, their presence. The thermal map of 20 people he knew by signature alone, each one distinct, each one warm in their own particular way. Uraraka was near the door to the stairwell. He could feel her, a warm, steady presence, hovering, debating whether to come up or wait. He knew she was telling Ida to wait. He could feel Ida's heat, rigid and proper, standing precisely 2 feet behind her. And Todoroki, slightly apart, leaning against a wall, his dual-natured thermal signature as unique as a fingerprint. They were there. They were always there now. He'd spent his whole life alone, unhappy, not damaged, just alone. A lantern with the shutters closed, all that light held inside, but the shutters were open now, not all the way. Maybe they'd never be all the way, but enough for light to get out. Enough for warmth to reach the people who stood close, enough. The sky changed. The gray shifted. A thin line of gold appeared on the horizon, pale at first, barely there, then deepening, warming, spreading. The clouds caught the color and held it, turning from gray to gold to orange to something that didn't have a name because it was too beautiful for language. Sunrise. The light crossed the city. Building by building, street by street, it reached Musutafu and touched it with warmth. Windows caught the light and threw it back. Birds sang. The world woke up. The light reached the roof. It touched Izuku's face. His skin drank it in. He felt the warmth spread through him, deep and slow and steady, filling every cell, every reserve, every corner of his being. The cold morning air around him warmed. The frost on the railing near his knee melted. The space around him became, as it always did, a little kinder, a little gentler, a little more like somewhere you'd want to be. He tilted his face up, closed his eyes. The gold light played across his features, the freckles, the green hair, the faint luminescence that lived under his skin, like a pilot light in a furnace. He smiled, small, quiet, real. Behind him, the stairwell door opened. He heard it but didn't turn. He felt Uraraka's warmth step onto the roof, felt her hesitate, felt her decide. "Hey," she said, soft. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah." "Can I sit?" "Yeah." She sat next to him, not touching but close. Close enough to feel his warmth. Close enough that the air between them was comfortable and golden. Ida came up behind her, stood, straight-backed, present. Todoroki followed, leaned against the railing, arms crossed, that half smile on his face, the one that was still new, still growing, still finding its shape. The four of them sat on the roof of UA High School and watched the sunrise. The city below them was waking up, lights in windows, cars on streets, the distant hum of a world that was messy and loud and full of people who needed things. People who were cold, people who were afraid, people who were lost in the dark, waiting for something warm to find them. Izuku felt the sun on his face and the warmth in his chest and the presence of three people who had found their way to him not because of his power, not because of his reputation, not because of any legend or hashtag or trending topic, but because of who he was. The quiet boy, the reader, the one who listened, the one who was warm. The city needed him. The world needed him. There were villains still out there, crises still coming, battles still to be fought, people still to be saved, fires still to be lit in the cold places of the world, and he would be there, every day. Not because he had to, not because he was the strongest, because somewhere, right now, at this exact moment, someone was cold, someone was afraid, someone was sitting on a curb in the dark, shaking, waiting for warmth that they weren't sure existed. And Izuku Midoriya had warmth to spare. He opened his eyes. The sunrise was complete. The sky was blue. The world was bright. He stood up, brushed off his pants, picked up his bag. "Come on," he said, not loud, not dramatic, just present. "We've got class." Uraraka smiled. Ida straightened. Todoroki pushed off the railing. They walked to the door together. 4 students. One morning. A world of work ahead. Izuku paused at the threshold, looked back at the sky one more time. The sun was up, fully up, clear and strong, pouring its warmth across everything it could reach. He felt it on his skin, felt it in his blood, felt it in the place behind his ribs where a pilot light had clicked on 20 years ago on a playground in Musutafu and had never, not once, gone out. He turned, walked through the door, and the warmth went with him. It always did. And somewhere in the world, in every cold place, in every dark room, in every alley, in every ruin, in every quiet corner where someone sat alone and afraid, the sun was rising. Not the one in the sky, the other one, the green one. The one that burned not because it had to, but because it chose to. The one that shone not for itself, but for every person it could reach. The one that sat quietly in the center of its own light and asked nothing of the world except the chance to make it warm. The legend of Izuku Midoriya didn't end that morning on the roof. Legends don't end. They become part of the air, part of the ground, part of the way people talk about what it means to be brave and kind and strong and warm. Years from now, a child will ask her mother, "What makes a hero?" And the mother will think about it. She'll think about the men in capes and the women with powers and the headlines and the rankings and all the noise of a world obsessed with strength. And then she'll remember a boy, a quiet boy. A warm boy, one who sat on a bench at age 4 and stood up when it mattered, who learned to hold his mother's hand without burning her, who threw a star at a robot and then asked a girl if she was okay, who fought in the rain on an empty tank and won, who sat on a curb next to a broken child and just waited, who drew a line of light and said, "This far, no further," who chose every single day to be warm. A hero, the mother will say, is someone who makes you feel like the sun came out. And the child will understand, not because of the words, but because of the warmth behind them. The sun comes up every morning, and so does he.
The roster is reaching god-tier levels. A huge shout-out to the newest legends joining the ranks and the longtime supporters who keep this community thriving. You guys are the fuel to the fire. Pro heroes, the elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. Jacob Rops, Dark Eye, DA, Fire 05, symbol of peace. The pillars of the community, the titans who keep our foundations solid and the hype at an all-time high. Damian Leon, Yam, Christian Mullins, Bully Maguire Shadow, Amory B, Kenneth Ponterus, Neostar Productions, Asael Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Thunder, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Chris Talley, Remorsefuls, Black Vein, Joshua Hedrington, Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK Eater, Akeno Himajima, Corey Tokaz, Yan, Devin Black, Crow, Dasher Games, Joe Bros, Ray Von Crimson River, Dante Alistair, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Howie 60, Ignatius, Albert. Hope of the universe, the ultimate guardians, celestial tier supporters whose impact literally shines across the galaxy. Tayshawn Palmer, Keyshawn, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Sean Brooks, Debbie Vo, L.S. Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, I Shoot X50, Greg Green, James, Kwon Yen Thompson, Juan, Zeno KJ. And that is how you build a legend. No noise, no nonsense, just results. If this story hit you the way it hit me, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next one is going to be even crazier. Don't say I didn't warn you.